All right, thank you for joining me on this episode of the Gospel Truth. I'm your host, Marlon Wilson, and today we have another debate. I hope you guys are prepared for Thanksgiving because it's tomorrow. And you know, if you can, in the chat room, if it's possible, you can write down something you're thankful for. You know, if you're a believer, you know you got many things to be thankful for. If you're a non-believer, you have many things to be thankful for. If you're a non-believer, you should be thankful that God has shown His common grace on you. But, you know, I really want you guys to be able to understand how important it is that we take this time of the season and we really reflect on what it means to be thankful. You know, if I can share anything that I'm thankful for, obviously thankful for my salvation, that God has called me out of my sin into His glorious salvation. Thankful for my family, thankful for all the friends that I have, you know. So, you know, there's plenty of things to be thankful for. And it is vitally important that we take that all into consideration, not just one time a year, around the time of Thanksgiving, things like that, but we always take that into consideration of what is important in our lives and what we should be thankful for. But, you know, while you're at it, while we're thinking about this whole thankful thing, you know what I'll be thankful for? If you guys will go ahead and share and like and follow my Gospel Truth page, the Gospel Truth page, and on YouTube and on Facebook. If you also have time to subscribe also to the podcast, I put all my content on podcast so that you'll be able to listen to it on the go. You know, the whole idea of the Gospel Truth is to engage the culture with Christian truth. And in that, you know, we do that with interviews, we do that with debates, we do that with biblical lessons. And I just desire for you to put it out there because God has blessed us with this avenue of sharing the gospel with everybody. So if you can please take time to go ahead, share, like, follow, do what you have to do in order to get this content out there, I would greatly appreciate it. But with that, I do want to go ahead and go over some announcements that I have coming up for my next 4 shows coming up. I have let me start from the beginning of this thing. All right, I have November 29th, I have David Powman versus David Lewis, and they're debating, is Calvinism true? Should be an interesting debate. Should be a very, very informative debate. You know, this debate's been going on for a very, very long time. So it's always interesting to see the arguments, see the positions that people have on this particular subject matter. And on the 30th, I have another Calvinism debate. Does Calvinism teach the biblical understanding of the gospel? So, you know, there are plenty of people out there who feel that Calvinism does not teach the gospel. And the gospel from a Calvinist position is not it at all. So we're going to hear some strong arguments there from the arguing the negative and affirmative positions on that one. So we should be looking out for that one. And I have a pretty good one coming up. Dr. Sean Cole will be debating Dr. Del Tuggy, and they'll be debating, does the Bible teach that God is a Trinity? That will be coming up December 9th, 2019. And also, I think I got my announcement sort of backwards because this one comes before that debate. I have an interview with Wesley Huff, and soon to be Dr. Wesley Huff, and we're going to be talking about the purpose and importance of difference in Bible versions. So that's going to be an interesting discussion as well. But with that said, I do want to bring in Mr. Dan and Dr. Anthony. They gonna come on in and introduce themselves. But I want to give a quick run through of how I met Dan. I came across Mr. Daniel Cahey. I met him I actually messaged him because I saw him on Modern Day Debate. So I said, man, he sounds like he could put a good argument together, man. Come on here and see if he can give a strong argument. So I reached out to him and he responded. So that's how we connected. And Dr. Anthony was sort of thrown in the fire by Mr. Pastor Andrew Rappaport. So I put my filler out there to say, you know, I want to see if somebody was interested in debating Young Earth. And Andrew Rappaport said, yeah, Daniel Anthony likes to do that, talk about that kind of stuff. I said, okay, let me connect with Anthony. So me and Anthony connected there, and he said he's down to do it. So it should be exciting. If I didn't say it already, the debate is going to be Young Earth. One portion of it is going to be Young Earth, and one portion is going to be morality in the Bible. But before we go into that, let me bring my guest in real quick. Not like that. There we go. What's up, fellas?
How are you?
Welcome to the Gospel Truth, man. You know, thank you too for joining me. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate you both.
Thank you, man.
Thank you for having us.
All right. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to give you a couple minutes. You know, go ahead and introduce yourself. Start with Daniel. Go ahead, go for it. Give a quick introduction to yourself.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Dan. Not much to say. I'm in school right now. I'm a senior, double majored in biology and psychology. Used to be a Christian, now I'm not. And I'm a bee man. I remove and relocate bees, so that's one interesting thing.
You remove and relocate bees.
Yeah, that's my job. If you want to see my website, it's danthebeeman.com.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check that one out there, man. See what's up with that. All right, Dr. Anthony, you go ahead and give a quick introduction of yourself.
I'm Dr. Anthony Silvestro. Most people know me as not a real doctor because I'm a dentist and drill teeth instead. So I'm a young Earth creationist, Christian. Wrote a book about 2 years ago that Pastor Andrew Rappaport was the primary reviewer on the origin of kinds. And I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you both for joining me once again. It's always a pleasure to have these folks come on the Gospel Truth and be able to share some knowledge, some stuff I probably don't know, some stuff I probably do know, but it's always awesome to come on and engage each other and see what the audience thinks as well when individuals get together to debate these subjects. So always exciting. Thank you two for joining me. All right, so we're going to get into the format real quick. So we're going to be debating. The first portion is going to be young Earth creation. And then the second portion is going to be morality in the Bible. So both portions will be 10-minute openings, 40-minute cross-examination, where both parties will get 2 opportunities to ask questions. And then at the end of both 40-minute both sections of debates, we'll do a closing statement. So everything sounds good?
Yep.
All right. So we're going to go with young Earth creation. Dr. Anthony, if you don't mind, you can go first.
Absolutely.
All right.
So first of all, I'd like to thank Marlon for arranging this debate and for Daniel in agreeing to meet with us and do these 2 topics in a debate. Our first topic, young Earth creation, is one that's hotly debated today among Christians and is often a laughing and ridiculing point of the atheists and agnostics of today. So I'm going to divide my opening into 2 parts. Number 1, young Earth creation is the only consistent biblical position. And number 2, that a young Earth and no molecules to man evolution position is also perfectly consistent with what we see in good science. So I'm going to repeat. Number 1, young Earth creation, only good, consistent biblical position. Number 2, that a young Earth and no evolution, molecules to man evolution, that position is also perfectly consistent with what we see in good science. So number 1, a young Earth. Specifically, I'm saying that the Earth and universe about 6,000 years old or young, and it's what the Bible exclusively teaches. Romans 1:18-20 makes it clear that every single person knows the true God that exists by his creation and the things that have been made. As I refer to God in this Bible verse and throughout our time today, I'm referring to the only true God, the one that we see as revealed in the Bible. Romans 2, verses 14-15 points out the moral laws written in everyone's heart. The reason why we all have a conscience, an absolute sense of right and wrong, is because God put it there. Now, as a Christian, my worldview is that God exists, his word is true. Therefore, everything I read in the Bible is true. For non-Christians, whether they're of a false religion like Mormonism, Buddhism, Jehovah's Witnesses, or claim to be agnostic or atheist, they are just denying the one true God that I profess and that they already know exists, but are suppressing the truth about him in their sin. God is so sure everyone knows that he exists that they're without excuse. In studying the Bible, most scholars acknowledge the biblical genealogies in the Bible being indisputable. So when we look at Genesis 1, it states, "In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth." We see the beginning of time, space, and matter, all created out of nothing, and literally in an instant. The first person ever made, Adam, was created on the 6th day of creation. The genealogies in Genesis 5 and Genesis 11 provide about 2,000 years of an unbroken lineage to the birth of Adam. Through genealogies and historical time markers, we see about 2,000 years of time passed from Abraham to Jesus. And just a quick glance at the calendar shows that we are about 2,000 years since the birth of Jesus. Let me repeat this again. Genealogies in Genesis 5 and Genesis 11 provide about 2,000 years of an unbroken lineage to the birth of Abraham. I think that's what I meant to say. Through genealogies and historical time markers, we see about 2,000 years of time passed from Abraham to Jesus. And so what we're saying here is that Adam's made on the sixth day of creation. We have 2,000 years that passes in unbroken genealogies from Adam all the way to Abraham. From Abraham to Jesus, through genealogies and historical markers, we get another about 2,000 years. And then obviously we look at our calendar and that was about 2,000 years ago. Hence, about 6,000 years of time has passed since Adam. And so when we add up these times, again, according to the only eyewitness testimony we have, which is God, the earth is about 6,000 years old. Now, when some professing Christians, I'm not talking about atheists here, but professing Christians make the claim that the earth is old, they almost never attempt to reinterpret the 6,000 years from Adam to today. Now, why is that? It's because the genealogies and the historical time markers are pretty airtight. So therefore, when what I would call an old earth Christian, when they try to claim that they believe in old earth, they don't mess with the time going from the birth of Adam to today. Rarely do they do that anyway. Instead, what they typically do is they look at the 6 days of creation and saying that they were not actual literal 24-hour days. But this would create a lot of problems biblically. So the Hebrew word yom is used for each of the 6 days in the Genesis account of creation. The old earthers object to this rendering and point out that yom can also mean era of time. While their objection has some merit, it is imperative that we look at the context of how the word is used in the sentence to get its true rendering. So if I made the following statement, back in my grandfather's day, you know that would imply era of time. If I stated, during the day I threw a football with my son, you know that day here meant during the daylight hours. If I uttered, it took 3 days to drive to Wyoming, you know that to mean 3 literal 24-hour days. So clearly the context of the sentence gives us the meaning of the word day. Now I'm going to up the ante a little bit. If I stated, I stayed up and studying morning and evening for my test, you would understand that I spent the better part of the last 24 hours reviewing my notes. If I change my statement to, I stayed up and studied morning and evening for 3 days for my board exam, you would know that I spent the last 3 literal 24-hour days diligently studying. The Hebrew is no different. We look at the context around the word yom. When the word yom is used with the words evening and morning, it indicates that the word yom means a 24-hour literal day. When the word yom is used with an ordinal number, like first, second, third, and so on, it indicates a 24-hour literal day. In the Bible, God was perfectly clear that he created in 6 literal 24-hour days because the sentence construction was for each day was modeled in this same way. There was evening and morning the first day. There was evening, there was morning the second day, and so on through the 6 days of creation. So with this sentence construction being used for all 6 days of creation, this gives us 6 literal 24-hour days from the beginning of time to the time that Adam was created on day 6. We even see confirmation of this in the Bible. If we go to Exodus 20, now most of you who are Christians should know this, it is the 10 Commandments. Exodus 20, 8 through 11 confirms these as literal days as God modeled our work week. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest based on creation. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. The reality is, according to the only eyewitness since the beginning of creation, we have an accurate timeline. In the beginning, time, space, and matter were created out of nothing. When the time began, the creation of the universe and everything in it was created over 6 literal days. Adam was created on day 6, from which point we have accurate genealogies and historical markers to give us around 4,000 years until Jesus took on flesh and was born. As the calendar of the entire world would indicate, Jesus was born about 2,000 years ago. Add these times up and we have an age of the earth and universe of about 6,000 years. So bringing up the point that we only have one eyewitness account of creation, as well as the entire history of the earth and universe, leads us into our second point regarding a young Earth. A young Earth and no evolution position is also perfectly consistent with what we see in good science. There is a clarification that needs to be made here. How do we define science? There are two types, historical and experimental. Historical science would be trying to figure out something that happened in the past. Because there is no way to actually test the observation, since it happened in the past, he must try to use current facts to piece together what had occurred. The best analogy to this is a murder trial when there's no reliable eyewitness account. Now, as a Christian, I proclaim that we have a reliable eyewitness, God. For unbelievers who reject that, they must try to use today's clues, or the clues of today, and try and determine what they believe what happened in the past, like how old the Earth is. The other category, science, experimental science, where one would use the scientific method, cannot be used here. In using experimental science, the person is trying to test an observation today and test it, which means it has to be repeatable. An example of this would be trying to figure out the perpetrator in an unsolved murder and then bringing that person to trial. An important concept with experimental science is that it can be used for determining some evidences used in historical science, but these cannot be used to prove something that happened in the past. It merely provides the best guess. I maintain that the scientific speculations about the age of the Earth and the viability of molecules of man evolution are bad, self-serving guesses at best, trying to do nothing more than protect the worldview of the unbelievers, which is anything but God. And so you notice I've got about 15 seconds left. I didn't use science one bit. I will during our 40-minute Q&A, but the thing is the science doesn't prove time. The eyewitnesses do, and we have that, God. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Anthony, for that opening statement. Okay, Daniel, make sure you unmute your mic. You have 10 minutes for your opening statement.
All right, how's it going, y'all? Good opening statement by Anthony. Surprisingly, I'd actually agree with you with most of that. So I believe that if I was a Christian and I fully believed that the Bible was infallible, I would hold the same positions as you. The major difference that we have is whether or not we believe the Bible is fallible or not, and also our stance on science. So, like you said, you didn't really use science much in that whole opening statement, which is really what I'm here to debate. You know, I'm not a theological expert. You probably know the Bible much better than I do. But all I have to say about the evolution, like you were questioning evolution and you were saying that atheists use that as a tool to allow them to believe in their faith of evolution, right? Or faith of atheism. So we didn't come across evolution because we had a problem with a lack of faith. So actually what happened was the last 250 years, we've known that whenever you look at rock strata, when you look at the lowest layers, they have the simplest life. And as you move upward, they have more and more complex life. And we also know that these layers were laid down sequentially in chronological order. So we've had this observation for 250,000 years that life has changed over time from a more simple to a more complex structure. So there was a quest to explain why this happened. That's when you had Lamarck's theory of acquired characteristics, stuff like that. Then Darwin came along and he just gave the best explanation, which was random mutation and then natural selection to select for the mutations that were beneficial and select against the mutations that were negative, right? So that's how we came across the theory of evolution. Also, the case for young Earth creationism isn't just against evolution, because we don't use organisms to date the age of the Earth. We don't use biological organisms at all. We use geological markers. We use radiometric dating. And whenever it comes to the date of the universe, so you believe the universe and Earth were created 6,000 years ago. So astronomy is an observational science, and we use astronomy to date the universe. We see that there's stars that are 10 billion light years away. And the reason why it's called 10 billion light years is because light takes 10 billion years to get from there to here. And we know that light is the speed limit of the universe. So we know for sure that it was traveling for 10 billion years. So unless God sped up that light to tricks than the amount of time that it took for it to get here. But yeah, I don't think we have much to converse about yet. I would like to get to the discussion if that would be okay with Marlon.
All right, thank you for that. Yeah, we can jump right into the discussion, a 40-minute cross-examination discussion. So once again, 40-minute cross-examination will have 10-minute, two 10-minute opportunities for each party to ask questions. So starting with Anthony, you're going to be cross-examining Daniel for 10 minutes.
Okay. So, Daniel, I will say this. First of all, I thank you again for being on here, and I'm enjoying the debate here. My goal isn't to make you into young Earth creationist. My goal is to give you the gospel today, and I pray that God grants you repentance and faith in who He is.
I understand that too. If I believed in hell, I'd be preaching to everybody I knew.
Yeah, no, I get it, and so what I found interesting is you and I have very similar backgrounds, but flipped. I was a math and chemistry double major in school. I went to dental school, was an evolutionist all the way through, got saved after this, did my absolute best to argue against creation, young Earth creation, and realized that the evolution at a very surface level sounds really good. The moment we start to dig a little bit is when it all falls apart. And so this is where my questions are coming into play, is that you asked, you brought up a number of things which I would expect you to bring up: rock layers, radiometric dating methods, and whatnot. So I'm going to ask you, the first question is you are correct in that the scientists are typically using rock layers and the strata that they perceive, as well as radiometric dating methods to get to get an age of the Earth. Now, first of all, when we look at the geologic column, right? So when they show us the geologic column, and it goes from what they would call the simplest life forms up to the most complicated, does that rock strata actually exist anywhere on this Earth, or was it put together by scientists trying to explain a concept?
Oh, it exists. So even if you go to the Grand Canyon, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
It shows that you're loading.
Yeah, right. I can hear you very well. Yeah.
All right. So like if we go to the Grand Canyon, or a place where we could actually see the striations, right? You could go in the bottom layer and you'll find simpler life forms, and you go to the top layer and you'll find more complex life forms. So if you were a paleontologist, you would see where on the Earth the Mesozoic rock strata is on the surface. So that happens because of erosion. It's usually in deserts and whatnot. And you start is a Mesozoic rock layer. And that's actually how they find fossils. It's very, very predictable. And the way it works is, like, basically there's sedimentary rock layers that are in concentric circles further and further out from the Earth. So does that answer your question? Well,
not quite, because this is what I would debate on, is that geologic column doesn't actually exist anywhere. So what they show in a textbook doesn't actually exist, because when we look at the Grand Canyon...
Well, I know that's an idolized...
Right, yeah.
That's just like the example of how it is. But
because obviously they have the Cambrian Explosion, right? So the reason why they came up with the Cambrian Explosion is because they actually don't have rock layers that exist anywhere on the Earth that go from simple life forms to slightly more complicated, a slightly more complicated, a slightly more complicated, to get to complex life forms. What we see is very rudimentary life forms on base layers, and then all of a sudden we see complex life forms throughout the layers. And here's a perfect example: the dinosaurs. Which the dinosaurs, they say, died out between 65 and 220 million years ago, right? The last of the dinosaurs, 65 million years ago. So how many rock layers down should we find dinosaurs?
How far down in the rock layers? Was that?
So yeah, that's a question. Yeah.
So it's in the same layer all around the world. So like
I
we
agree.
can make total predictions. We could say, okay, look, in Montana, this level of rock strata is exposed, and we go there, and that's where we find the fossils from the Jurassic period.
So here's what I find troubling about an evolutionary worldview is that when we find dinosaurs, we are literally finding them on the surface layers all over the Earth.
I just explained that. So basically, imagine we had a jawbreaker, right? You know how jawbreakers, they'll have those layers of candy, right? So erosion pretty much licks the layers off, right? So say we're licking layers off, we get 3 or 4 layers down, right? If you were walking across that, you'd be like, wait, I'm in the yellow layer, but this is on the surface. This should be the white layer, but it's because of erosion. That's basically how it is.
Yeah, and I agree.
And we could predict that fully with maps. So what I'm saying is we know where the yellow layer is, the red layer is. I'm still sticking with the analogy. So we could just say, hey, go there because that layer represents this time period.
Yeah.
And you'll find organisms that are from that time period. 100% consistently, that's how archaeology works, you know?
Well, I mean, that's what they say, right? But when you actually look through the research...
Well, no, that's actually how they find fossils, though. So
I agree.
You would imagine...
Yeah.
If paleontologists, if there was a better way to find fossils, or if that wasn't a good way to find fossils, they wouldn't just do that. You know, like they consistently do that because they consistently find the fossils from the period that they want to find based off of its level of erosion.
Yeah.
And how far down it is in the geological strata.
Right. Now, this is what I'm saying is the geological strata that you would read in a textbook doesn't actually exist anywhere on Earth. They've kind of put that together themselves. And that
okay, you're saying like the picture doesn't exist, but
correct.
Pictures of all of the species of horses don't exist in the real world. You know, we put those together, but that doesn't mean that all the species of horses.
Yes. So I guess my point in all this, so I'm asking this question is because when we look at the rock layers around the Earth, all we're finding is complex organisms throughout all the rock layers, which
no. It's different organisms though.
Right.
So you will never go in the Mesozoic rock strata level and find a human bone. It's never happened ever. And if you could find one example of a fossilized human bone in any of the layers of rock strata that are not modern, you'd win a Nobel if they have that in archaeology.
No, and I get that. I guess what my point is from a Christian worldview, we would look at all these rock layers that are laid down, right? Because the rock layers that they're all in is sedimentary rock, right? That means that sediments slowly buried all of these complex organisms everywhere. Yeah. And what I would point out to our listeners is that when we look at what they would call Mesozoic layers and different layers, you will actually find some of the same organisms among different layers. We will find dinosaurs, like we don't have to dig down to find dinosaurs. How is it the dinosaurs are constantly in the muddish layers on the tops?
Not digging down to find dinosaurs.
Yeah, and not only that is not only are we not having to dig down, I mean, they're really easy towards the surface, which we would expect because in a Christian worldview, we would say...
Wait, no.
Yeah, we would say that you have flood layers that were all laid down by the flood, hundreds of feet.
So we have concentric circles around the Earth, right? So the most inner circle would be the oldest life. The outer circle would be the youngest life, right? Erosion wear layers because you can wear down to 2 or 3 layers deep. You could wind up in the Mesozoic and there will be fossils from the Jurassic.
Yeah.
And they know this, and they know that this is so regular that we could actually say, wait, so in Montana, there's 3 layers of rock strata that have been worn down because they're desert, right? And we could say, hey, go there and you'll find Jurassic fossil, you'll find T-Rex, you'll find types of dinosaur, you know?
Yeah, so...
all from the Jurassic period. So what I'm saying is...
Yeah, so, I understand what you're saying here. The issue that I see...
like, why do we not find...
Yeah, the issue I see is that scientists are looking at layers and labeling the layers based on the fossils they're finding in them, even though the layers were supposed to be known by the way that they were laid in strata. So there's actually a circular argument going on with the fossils that are found, where they're found, and then where they're found, how old the fossils are. And I guess what I'm pointing out is the inconsistencies among the rock layers. And here's the big one. I know we don't have a lot of time in this part of the cross-examination, but how do fossils actually form? This is a major issue here, because we understand fossils, and you and I would both agree, fossils that are in rock layers, as we figure out where they are perfectly preserved. Whether they are bones or they are plant life, I mean, things that should decay really, really fast. If you had a leaf blow off a tree and fall down, it's not going to sit there for a long time before it gets buried. The way fossils actually form is from something that buries them catastrophically while the organism is actually still alive or had just died. So
that's completely untrue.
So
they don't.
Yeah. So how do fossils actually form?
Fossilization rate. So you find very, very few fossils as per amount of organisms that have existed. So if something dies, it might be a 1 in a million chance that it fossilizes. But since we have such a long period of geologic time, we have times for those fossils to accumulate. And then about the...
You now have 10 minutes to cross-examine Dr. Anthony.
All right. So, Dr. Anthony, earlier we were talking about the fossil record and rock strata. So, why do we never find any fossils of mammals in the Archaean zone? So that's way below the Mesozoic.
Yeah.
So we do find Archaea. So we find the simplest organisms, which are Archaea, and we find nothing else. So why would that be?
Yeah, good question. Well, this would have to do with the difference in worldview, right? So as you had stated, the rock layers, you believe the oldest ones are at the bottom, superimposition, right? Oldest at the bottom, newest ones on top. Whereas I would agree with you with that. The oldest ones on bottom, newest ones on top, except I think that those were laid down over a period of 6 to 8 months, not hundreds of millions to billions of years. So when we look at the fossil record that is in our rock layers, I would believe that the flood had dumped many sedimentary layers in quick succession. So what we would find is, it appears this is what the fossil record shows us, is where certain mammals are at is where they would have been buried. So some organisms, depending on, and we don't have enough time for me to get into all of the details on this, but and obviously there's creationist websites you can go read on some of the studies they've done on this. The reason why dinosaurs would be on the top is because the dinosaurs would be the biggest. They'd be the ones that are able to get away and get to highest ground easiest when impending waters are coming. You look at mammals, some mammals are going to get buried really fast from some of the first layers. Fish will be interspersed throughout.
But what I'm asking is, like, why isn't there a single one? So that like you could say a difference in buoyancy would make them fall differently in the flood. But why is there not a single one? So if we go to the Archaean rock strata, there's not a single mammal. If we go to the Jurassic rock strata, there's not a single mastodon. There's not a single large mega mammal, right? So then if we go deeper than the Jurassic, there's not a single dinosaur. So it's not just that it's a tendency, it's a chronological deadline. So if the species hadn't been existed, it is not found in the rock strata at that point. If the flood were the cause of all of this this fossilization, it would make sense that there would be a little bit of mixing.
Which there is.
And
we have evidence of that.
So what would be the evidence? Like, where is the mammal in the Mesozoic?
Well, I can't tell you specifically on where the mammal actually is, right? So
even if you Google it, if you looked for a mammal in the Mesozoic, what you would find is a pre-mammal that had sort of mammalian characteristics, doesn't have a placenta, and is very, very tiny, right? So you have a pre-placental mammal. You don't have a single placental mammal in the Mesozoic. And like it wouldn't make sense that there wouldn't be and it's not only layered chronologically, but it's ordered in the layers of development. So placentas evolved later on. The reason why we know that is because we still have extant similar to mammals that don't have placentas. So if you look at kangaroos, marsupials, they are almost identical to mammals, except they're non-placental animals, right? So we know placentas were a pretty recent evolution, right? And we do not see them deep in the rock strata as we'd predict via evolution, but I don't see how you would predict that with the creation model. So how would you predict the rock strata? Like, how would you come to the conclusion that it stratified exactly how it did with no overlap between mammals and dinosaurs?
Well, actually, we do see overlap because there's mammals and dinosaurs on the top layer. And so,
well, you're saying that there's a huge difference between top layer and layers of rock strata.
Yeah.
So just like the giant jawbreaker, right? If I licked halfway to the middle right there and we found a yellow thing in the middle, we'd say, wait, this is the outside layer. There has to be yellow things all around. And you'd say, no, because you've dug deeper into the strata of the jawbreaker. So you're comparing strata to surface level. So it's not the same thing.
So the reason why I'm doing this is because when we look at actual observable science, okay, what we're observing is we're observing rock layers, all the rock layers you're talking about, okay? And I'm not talking anything scientific right now. I'm not talking about me putting creationist ideas or secular ideas into the rock layers. All I'm saying is let's look at the rock layers. What do we find? We find at the base of the Grand Canyon what they would call the layer before, what I would call the layer before the flood, what you would call the start of hundreds of millions of years of rock deposition. But either way, what we find is a layer that has virtually nothing in it. A couple of simple organisms, what we call simple organisms. Every strata after that has complex organisms. And so this is what we have.
I think we need to have a continuum of complexity, because you can't just say it's complex and everything's lumped as complex. So whenever you say a trilobite is complex, a trilobite is not as complex as a mammal. It's not even close.
I would agree.
And whenever you look down there, we don't even have homeotherms, which are organisms that can regulate their own temperature. So we have a ton of evolutionary adaptations that we do not see at that lowest layer. So you could say they're complex, and that is true. Pretty much all life is complex. Even single cells are very complex. You know, they're hard to really wrap your head around. They're difficult. But to say that they're just complex and that means we have complex life like there is not true. You know, it's completely different.
Yeah. So here's where obviously a definition of complexity would be an order, right? So you're probably asking me how I'm going to define complex to begin with. And this is how I would have to define complex. And for instance, if we look at what scientists claim to be our closest relative as humans, which would be the chimpanzee, all right? Now, it's a flat-out lie when they say we're 99.2% similar. It's not true. Those are the hot zones among the zones that seem to be most alike. When you actually look at the genomes, it's around 85%, and that's what all the research is showing today. So you can look that up. It's about 85%. It fluctuates between 72 and 85%. I'm going to give the benefit of that 85%. On the genome, even an 85% similarity between a chimp and a human would result in 15% difference, and as large as the genome is, would be 450 million base pair differences in the DNA. 450 million base pair differences, which would require at a minimum 450 million point mutations. Now I say this because it's not like when a scientist says, here's a chimpanzee, so I got this reverse with the camera. Chimpanzee, here's a human, and they put up 4 or 5 different what I would call ape skulls, but they would say are transitions. I would say, okay, wonderful. You got a few what you call transitions and showing an evolutionary model. I'm saying, where are all the transitions that should be there between a chimpanzee and human? Not only that, where are all the transitions that go from the single cell to the chimpanzee? Guess what? They don't exist. That's the problem I'm seeing. So when I look at complexity, that's what I'm looking at.
Okay, so similar to how we were talking about complexity, and complexity, it doesn't just deserve a definition, it's a continuum. And I think you would agree that complexity is a continuum, and it's a complete continuum.
Not in the same way that evolutionists would say it. I would say there's different...
I'm just about the concept of complexity itself. So you could get a little tiny bit more complex, a little bit tiny bit more complex. We could argue I would actually agree with you that the Cambrian explosion, the reason why they call it an explosion is because it was an explosion of complexity.
And they have no
but
clue
it
why.
just, yeah, we don't.
And they have nothing before it. That's my point. There's nothing that goes.
Well, they do have stuff. They have Archaea. They have Archaea. They have early eukaryotic organisms, and then that explodes, which is the lineage that we would suspect. But about the about the transitional fossils. So if I showed you a fossil that was an intermediate between a chimpanzee and a human, it wouldn't satisfy you. You would say, I need another one. I need one in between. I need one in between. Because whenever we're looking for a transitional fossil between humans and chimpanzees, we do have Homo erectus. We have Neanderthal. We have organisms that are more ape-like, less human-like, and sort of in the middle. So that actually would be a transitional fossil. And no matter how many we find, we found over 15, 20 species of human, right? So like we found like derivations of human. And we've even, recently I read an article that they found a human that was preserved enough where they're able to do a DNA. We've already ascertained the genome of the Neanderthal, right? So we did DNA testing on this remains, and it was a half Neanderthal, half Homo sapien. So we know that there was other species of hominid, other species of human. They lived with us, they interbreed with us, and we outcompeted them. So in your model, where do these other species of human come along?
Yeah, it's a great question.
And why would you not consider them transitional if they are in between us and ape?
Yeah, so this is a two-part question. So number one is you asked me what the transitions are, and I would say that the Neanderthal is a human. I don't see a difference between so Neanderthal and human would be no different than the different skull structure of me, a Mediterranean descent, versus somebody who is of Asian descent, Chinese, right? We would have very different skull structure.
That's completely not true.
Of course it is.
That's completely not true.
All right.
They would have minorly different skull structure, but you actually can't identify the race of bones.
Okay.
So that's actually like
I'm not saying you can do race of bones. I'm saying that there's different skull structures, and Neanderthal's a human.
You were saying that the skull structure between you and an Asian is so different that you can identify the two between each other. You can do that with Homo sapiens.
All right.
Well, you said you'd be able to tell the differences, but you can't.
That's good.
We should be going like 20 minutes per.
That's 10 minutes right there. All right, Anthony, you got it for 10 more minutes.
Man, that just flew by. This is not. We gotta do this.
I'm loving this.
We gotta do this again. Okay.
I would love to.
So I will take a minute to finish answering your question, because I think it's a fair question. Is that I look at Neanderthal as a human being. I don't see the difference. There's a difference in skull structure. I believe they're human in every way. Some of the other, what they prop up as being transitional forms, I would say are apes of some degree. We don't know what they are, but they're apes. They're not a transition. And I guess my point, so that's number one. The second part of the question is how many transitions would it take? Well, let me say this. Statistically, if I find one human in the fossil record and one chimpanzee in the fossil record, I should have 450 million transitions between them if there's 1 point mutation per new species, right? And that would be as efficiently as possible for evolution to work.
Okay. So point mutation. So like if we're talking about point mutations, though, so if we look at the United States right now, the next generation will legitimately have trillions of point mutations. Each baby that's born has hundreds of thousands of point mutations. Like we have a lot of non-deleterious point mutations, right?
Right,
and
but obviously that's what we're talking about here.
We have a lot of junk DNA. So each generation, the gene pool itself is going to acquire billions of new point mutations. So saying 1 point mutation per generation, that's not even a lot. You know, like we can acquire billions of point mutations per generation.
So I'll ask a question then, because this is where I would 100% disagree with you. So in what I was saying is that we would have to have a point mutation that is increasing information going from a chimpanzee to humans, right? We believe we're the higher life form. And so you would have to have not just 5 or 6 pretend transitional fossils, we should be finding billions of them. And that's really the issue, is that 450 million point mutations, if you have 10 humans, 10 chimpanzees in the fossil record, we should have 4.5 billion transitional fossils. I mean, so my point is that we should be tripping over them if we were actually evolved from chimpanzees just 10 to 12 million years ago. But so here's my question for you. Yeah. So here's my question, because I don't want to cut you off, but I think this will help us in cloaking this idea is for evolution to occur. And I'm going to ask you a couple quick questions, but for evolution to occur, molecules around evolution to go from a single cell, right, which you and I would both agree is complex. Like most biologists, I give you credit. Most biologists would say this is a simple cell. There's no such thing as a simple cell. They're complex.
I agree with that. I think whenever biologists refer to a simple cell, they mean relatively. So I think they have an understanding this continuum, because anybody that's a molecular biologist really understands that the cell's pretty complex. But
I agree.
I agree with
Yeah, they think that, but they don't say that in public when they're trying to justify evolution. So when they say,
try to shade it, I agree with you. That's a little dishonest, and I think people who do that.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree. So we have what they would call simple cell. We would call complex cell. But in order to go from that one complex cell to our human bodies, which depending on the research contains 30 to 60 trillion cells, right? And you would also agree that to go from a single cell to a human being, you had to add lots of information to the genome, right? Now,
yes,
yeah, tons. I mean, tons, billions, maybe. But lots of information has to be added to the genome. Now, here's the question, and this is. I don't mean this to be a trap question. You may not even know the answer to this. I have asked the same question to PhD evolutionary biologists. I have recordings of this as I've talked to them. One was at NYU, a guy who's just getting his PhD. And this is the question. Of all the mutations we've ever discovered, we have three categories. We have mutations that theoretically would increase information, they'd be beneficial. We have others that would be just a perceived benefit, but it's actually a loss of information. Something like sickle cell anemia is a perceived benefit, but it's a loss of information. It helps people if you're in an area of malaria. So we have those two, and then we have neutral mutations that seem to be neutral, but really, as all geneticists say, it's actually a loss of information. It just doesn't show up on the macro scale. It looks like there's no benefit or no loss of function, but there's a loss of information somewhere. And then we would have ones that had a loss of information in general, right? So these are the categories. Now, of all the mutations,
I think I actually have a good response for you.
Well, here's my question then. Of all the mutations that have ever been discovered, how many have ever been shown to actually increase information into the genome?
All right, so one thing I would like to say, so if we're talking about information, right, so we have a DNA code. If there's a point mutation, there's not an increase or decrease of information, there's a change of information. So whether or not this change is beneficial or deleterious, that's a different conversation. But I do have an example of a change in genetic information that led to a positive outcome. So we ran this experiment in Dr. Boompathy's lab. He's a microbiologist down here in Louisiana. Great guy, great biologist. And what we did is we took some soil bacteria. We took a random scoop of soil bacteria, and we mixed it in a petri dish of ethylbenzene, which is hazardous to bacteria. It kills bacteria. But we put just a little bit of ethylbenzene, and then we put some glucose, some agar, and we let them grow, right? So we let them grow for about 2 days, let them multiply generation after generation after generation. 2 days is a little bit to us, but 2 days for bacteria might be thousands of generations, So over this generational period, like over these generations, one strain of bacteria evolved an enzyme that was able to break down ethylbenzene, right? So they had no mutation to break down ethylbenzene. Like these bacteria don't naturally have the ability to break down ethylbenzene. But after we let them mutate and grow, the specific microbe that evolved the ability to dissolve ethylbenzene had a great evolutionary advantage and took over the entire cell. So originally we had thousands of different types of bacteria. And then at the end, we had one or two because the one particular species of bacteria that had the positive mutation and divided a bunch of times, it took over the place because it had a great survival advantage because it could now digest ethylbenzene and the glucose. So that's an example of a change in genetic material that caused a positive benefit that was completely novel, not existent in the population before. And you find the same thing with antibiotic resistance. So I know a lot of creationists do say that antibiotic resistance is a loss of information because it's just like a change of
it is
certain biological defenses that already exist, but some of them aren't. So that's not true across the board. When this especially happens is whenever you have gene duplications. So if you have a single gene, if you work on that one gene, you're losing the function of that gene. But we have these mutations called gene duplications, where all of a sudden you have two pairs of an identical gene. So one is allowed to freely mutate while the other retains its function. So in a lot of bacteria that have evolved antibiotic resistance, it's actually gene duplications. One gene is being worked on by evolution and the other one is staying stagnant. So now it has the ability to have its original cellular defense plus a completely novel protein that allows for a completely novel defense.
Yeah, and I understand that information, but I'm going to go back to my question. How to go from a single cell, right? Because I would dispute with you the findings of the experiment. Now, I would agree with the observational aspect of it. I would disagree with what happened on the genetic level. I would say that bacteria already had the gene present to be able to process this, to have that enzyme, and that it wasn't until it was put into a different environment, similar to an antibiotic-resistant bacteria, where it would be able to flourish. That's what I would say there. So I would have different.
It's more like an epigenetic thing, and like it being put in the ethylbenzene activated it.
Absolutely,
and
I would say that with.
I see how you believe that, but epigenetics involves histones. So bacteria DNA is circular, so it's not bound in histones like our nucleated DNA. So the bacteria that we're working on, they don't even have nucleus; they have nucleoli, which are just clusters of chromosomes that are just wrapped in. They're not wrapped in histones, so they can't have epigenetic modification like ours.
So
like they're either on or they aren't whenever instigated by the particular.
And so I'm not going to pretend that we as humans even understand the mechanism what they have. I would have to go by what we understand from humans and animals, the mechanism we have there with epigenetics, which is clear. But so I go back to the original question is, how many mutations have ever been shown to increase information in the genome? Because that is the thing that is absolutely necessary. We can talk about gene duplication.
I did give you two right there. And another one I wrote a paper on was whole genome mutations in plants, right? So there's hundreds of species of plants that we know of that recently diverged from other plants. And the way this happened was whole genome duplications. So it's whenever the cells divide, instead of taking one chromosome, they accidentally take two. Now the next generation has double the amount of chromosomes that it should. And what happens is, if it has double the amount of chromosomes, it can't mate with the singular chromosomal plant, but it can mate with the other plants that have happened to have the same genome duplication. So it immediately genetically isolates them where they can evolve separately. And since it has two separate genomes, it's able to mutate at an incredibly fast rate and have incredibly beneficial mutations that allow it to do incredibly novel things.
All right, that's 10 minutes for Dr. Anthony. All right, Daniel, you got it, man. 10 minutes.
10 minutes? I didn't think about my question while we were talking. I really am enjoying talking with you, man. You seem like a good guy. But, so whenever it comes to the age of the universe, so everything that we've been talking about right now has been biology and sort of geology.
Yeah.
When it comes to the age of the universe, how do you explain that there are stars that are billions of light years away, knowing that according to all of our physics, light is the speed limit of the universe? If you make light go any faster, it destroys all of our equations, right? I think you would agree that God makes the universe constant, like he holds it in place. And so how did that light get from that end of the universe to this end of the universe with only 6,000 years?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you're right. We talked about biology, and I would contend that there's never been a mutation discovered that increases functional genetic information over time, and that would be my biggest bone against evolution. Now, my biggest bone against light. That because of the, yeah, and I know you would. And you know, in this format, we don't have time to really flesh that stuff out a lot more. So here's my answer for the light: is we as creationists have the exact same problem as the astronomers do, which is this. There's something called a horizon problem. And the horizon problem would say this. I don't know if you're familiar with the horizon problem. This is why the Higgs boson particle is such a big deal, because it would help to solve some of this problem. The horizon problem would be like this. If you had a piping hot cup of coffee and you put an ice cube in it. And the moment that that ice cube was melted, if you tried to drink from that coffee, you would scald yourself. Why? Because there'd be a cold layer and a hot layer, and there wasn't enough time for that heat to transfer. Now, when we look at cosmic background radiation, and we can go all over to the what they call the empty, vast empty spots of the universe, right? Most of the universe is vastly empty, but we look at the cosmic background radiation, and they find that our universe is at a very universal temperature, very temperate temperature at, let me rephrase that. The temperature is the same everywhere in the universe, in the empty space, very uniform, thank you, within 1 to 10 to the negative 5th Kelvin, or Celsius, right? So it's almost equal. Here's the problem. If the universe is 86 billion light years big that we can tell, there has not been enough time for enough light to travel for heat energy transfer for us to observe what we're observing with cosmic background radiation. And so even in the model of the astronomers and astrophysicists, they have the same problem. There's a light travel problem. Somehow, it would look like light has to travel faster than the speed of light. So HORIZON, that's the horizon problem. And so we have the same problem as you guys do. Now we have explanations, or possible explanations as creationists, as to how this could occur. One of which being, this is an issue. Nobody knows what the speed of light is. We know what the average speed of light is. We know when we take a photon and bounce it off of something and come back, we know what the average speed is. It could very well be the light goes instantaneous one direction and it's a lot slower on the way back, and then the average speed of light is what we have today as the average speed of light. That's just one idea. But the point is that the astronomers have the same problem we do. So while I can't give a perfect explanation as to why we can see the light from a star that I would agree is 10 to 13 billion light years away, they have the same problem.
All right, so let me talk about the horizon problem first, and then we can do the speed of light thing. So the horizon problem is only a problem if you believe it was ununiform in the first place. So because of the conservation of energy, you would expect the Big Bang to happen very uniformly. If energy is shooting out in that direction, it's shooting out in that direction. You can't have a one-sided explosion, basically.
Yeah, but they don't believe
because
that.
There was nothing to block.
Yeah, but astrophysicists don't actually believe that. They believe there's hot and cold spots the way that their equations are. And that's why they needed the Higgs boson particle, because it seemed like it would help to give more of an answer to what you're just saying.
Physicists believe that there's hot and cold spots?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's observationally proven that there's not hot and cold spots, though.
Well, you can't. No. Well, I'm not saying observational proof. I'm saying, according to their calculations, going back to the milliseconds or even less than that from the Big Bang, there had to be hot and cold spots, according to their calculations, for stars, planets, and whatnot to form the way they did. But in those calculations, we shouldn't have a very uniform temperature universe because not enough time has passed. And that's so they were looking at the Higgs boson particle to try to help solve the problem.
I've never heard of any scientist say that. So
it's in the journals.
I honestly, I can't speak about this much. I'm not an astrophysicist. That's not my thing.
Yeah, that's okay.
I do get what you're saying, and if what you're saying is true, I'm sure that there is a perfectly physical explanation. So there's a lot of gaps in science, but that's just how science works. Like, we find gaps and we put all of our effort into filling them. If you would have talked to us 100 years ago, we would have had no clue about the Big Bang. We wouldn't even know what cosmic background radiation was. So I'm sure if there is the hole where you're saying there is the hole, we will fight diligently to fix it. But I've never heard of that hole, so I'm not sure if it exists, because I do say sort of attuned with the world. Okay, I'll take your word for it. But so when it comes to the speed of light, though, I think what you said was a very non-scientific answer, in my opinion. So you're saying that
no. I didn't say I believe it. I'm saying that
you think it's possible.
These are one of the possibilities that have been put forth to help answer the problem. Yeah.
So what observational science or experimental science has been done to make you believe that would be the case? Because in order to just throw a hypothesis forward, a hypothesis is a reasonable guess. So that to me sounds like the equivalent of me saying, hey, but God could make it go faster in one direction than the other direction. I have really no proof for that. Because whenever we're talking about sending light in that direction, we know that whenever a space shuttle is headed away from us, we could send light and the light still travels at the same speed. Mm-hmm. We've tested light in space. We've tested light in a vacuum. We've tested light in water. We've tested light in pretty much every single possible scenario. And it always goes pretty much the speed of light. Sometimes it goes a little bit slower. There was a report 2 years ago that it went a little bit faster, but that's been debunked.
Yeah.
So
I'm just saying every time
we
you
really
see,
have no scenario in
Yeah.
which light is going faster than light goes.
I'm not
And
saying,
I don't think there's any reason or any reasonable reason to say it might go faster. I think that's just justification of a preconception.
Yeah, and to be fair, I just want to make it perfectly clear. This is only one of the thoughts out there because the speed of light is only called the average speed of light. It is, and so you can look at any science textbook. It's called the average speed of light. And
I don't know. I've never heard it called the average speed of light.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be the average speed of light because that's the maximum speed of light. Because the speed of light that you see, like the 3.8, is it 3.0 times 10 to the 8th, something like that?
Something like that.
But so whenever you look at the speed of light, that is the speed limit of the universe. Like what we put as the speed of light is what Einstein got from the Lorentz transformations that showed, hey, wait, you can't go faster than this in this universe. It's not even like, so the speed of light, saying it's the speed of light is sort of taken away from it. It's the speed that information is allowed to travel in this universe. That's how I've heard it explained by some good astrophysicists.
Yeah.
So that is the maximum speed of the universe. So it wouldn't be the average speed because it can go slower, but it can't go faster. So the average speed of light would be below that. And I understand if you're saying maybe the light could travel a little bit faster, like under some purposes, but in order for light to get from where it is, like where the planets are, no, not the planets, where the supernova are that we're checking out, to where we're at right here, it would have to travel orders and orders and orders of magnitude faster than what we believe it travels. Like it would be the biggest scientific discovery in the history of mankind. It would literally just throw everything that we've ever thought on the ground, and we'd have to start anew in physics because pretty much all of our equations are based off of the speed of light.
Oh, I agree.
Like you'll be hard pressed to find equations that don't include c.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I
just don't think that there's any good reason to think that light would travel faster than that. And then
but again, I'm not saying it.
Say hypothetically that I've heard some people say that maybe God just made it where we could see the entire universe because what's the point of creating the entire universe if we can't see it? You know, but in order to say that, it would sort of be like a God deception. Like the way I see it is if there is an all-powerful, all-just God, he doesn't want to make people go to hell because they're smart and they know the speed of light and they think it's a contradictory thing. He easily could have made it in a way where the heavens would point to his glory, you know? So this particular thing is the heavens pointing away from the truth of the Bible because the Bible is pretty clear about the 6,000 years. You know, it's pretty clear. So if the heavens give us observational evidence that it can't be 6,000 years, that seems like a contradictory thing.
Yeah, but of course that would be the eye of the beholder, right? So as I'll end up talking about a little bit later is we have different worldviews, right? My worldview is going to start at a 6,000-year-old Earth. Your worldview is going to start at a universe that's billions of years old. And so... Well,
that's not true. So
okay,
your worldview starts at 6,000. Well, your worldview starts at the Bible.
Correct.
Right? Like your axiomatic truth is that the Bible is revealed truth from God. Right?
Right.
That's your axiom.
Absolutely.
My axiom is reason. Like I believe that reason is sound. And the thing about axioms is you sort of can't dig underneath them. So I know you could say, why do you think reason's that? But that's the whole point of it being an axiom. I start my axiom with reason is sound. And whenever we reason, we get to science. Whenever we science, we get to the age of the Earth being 13.8 billion years. And I think that you would actually agree. Like, I mean, I know you can't agree with this in a debate, but if you were an atheist, I think you would look at the science and you'd say, okay, that star is 10 billion light years away. It had to have taken 10 billion years to get here. And do you agree with that?
Well, the thing is I was an atheist, and I came to God with the Bible, and the science is very convincing that it fits with what the Bible teaches. So I wouldn't agree with you. Because at one time I did, and now I'm not there.
Yeah. And
okay,
one more thing. You say that okay. So you say that the science is what pointed you towards the Bible.
No.
We're talking about a particular science claim. So what's the particular science claim that points you to the 6? Like if you didn't have the Bible, what would make you date the Earth at 6,000 years?
All right, last answer, Doctor.
Okay, thank you. So let me say this, is that science is always a moving target. The Bible is not. And so the issue with the science is that I can show science today the way you can, and it's going to change tomorrow. It's going to change in 50 years. I can give you the best science that I think this is the best one of them all. Okay, it goes to radiocarbon. Radiocarbon, which can only be dated at between 60 and maybe 100,000 years at its upper limit. Every science textbook will teach you.
No, it's way lower than that.
I say at its upper limit. At its upper limit.
Oh, yeah. Well,
we think it's,
I'm just saying, though, if people did it at that upper limit, that would be unjust. Because it's, I think the half-life is about 3,701 years. It's like something low like
5,780 years is what the half-life is. And so we have radiocarbon. And this is the issue, is that if you can't detect radiocarbon, pick the year, 60,000, 80,000, 100,000. I agree with you. I think it's closer to 60,000 years is when you can't detect it anymore. Here's the problem. If I test things that science says by rock layers are older than 60,000 years, right? They say it is, but I find radiocarbon in it. It has to be younger. So diamonds, 1.1 to 3 billion years old, have radiocarbon in it. Can't be billions of years old. It's less than 60,000 years old. Dinosaur bones, everyone that's ever been tested for radiocarbon has radiocarbon in it. Can't be 65 to 220 million years old. Has to be thousands of years old. We see the same thing with oil.
Well, how much radiocarbon are you talking about? So
detectable amounts. I'm just talking detectable amounts.
Wait, no. Detectable amounts, but I think that's misleading, though, because we don't stop dating at 60,000 years because there's no more detectable amounts of carbon-14.
You can't date it.
We stop doing it because it's no longer accurate. So, okay, we will find radiocarbon. So there is no amount of half-lives that will pass that you will have zero carbon-14.
I agree.
You know,
all right.
So there will always be detectable amounts of carbon, and it's just, it won't be enough for us to accurately predict because we do it via a ratio. So whenever you like lower and lower and lower and lower the denominator, it screws up the equation. You know, it makes it less precise.
I agree completely. And all I'm saying is the equipment we have will show that it has to be younger than 60,000 years because we have detectable radiocarbon.
No, it does. That's not how it is, though.
Absolutely true.
It's detectable.
Thank you for letting us go for extra minutes.
All right, fellas, good.
We stop at 60,000 years because it's no longer accurate. It's not because there's not detectable radiocarbon. Those are two completely separate
issues. That's not what the science textbooks would say.
Radiocarbon. Wait, no, you are wrong on that. Like you're saying that's smugly, but you know you're wrong.
No, I'm not.
Hey, I need the moderator to do a Google.
We have to have a conversation totally on young Earth.
Yeah, we might have to do a long debate on this one next time.
This will be a long one. So
we will.
We have concluded the first topic. All right. So now we're going to transition to the second topic, which is morality in the Bible. And once again, I have the same format, 10-minute opening statements, and then a 40-minute cross-examination. But at the end of that 40-minute cross-examination, there will be a 10-minute closing to close out the debate. So with that said, Dr. Anthony, you go ahead. You got it first for your 10-minute opening statement.
Okay. So thank you, Dan, again. It's been fun so far. I can't believe it's already half over. So Daniel, my opponent today, is not actually argued for science per se regarding origins. He might disagree with that, but I don't believe he's argued for science per se. Instead, his argument is one that's actually against God. Our second topic today, morality in the Bible, is no different. So Christian ministries around the country report that regardless of what subject they specialize in, so we're talking about parachurch ministries and whatnot, the most common question asked of them is some variation of this question. If God is so powerful and so good, why do bad things happen? There's a great way to answer this question biblically for people that are hurting due to the sinful and cursed world. But this is a loaded question. It contains several assumptions, one of which is that people are generally good. Therefore, why would a good God allow evil to occur to people that are in general good? In this loaded question, there's a standard that's being assumed, and that's one of good and evil. So when an unbeliever, like Daniel here, asks a question about morality in the Bible, the overwhelming issue is that they can't reconcile what they perceive to be atrocious actions committed by God or commanded by God in the Old Testament. This question is also a loaded one. So whether an unbeliever asks, and I'm going to go through several thoughts here, is that whether an unbeliever asks, why does God commit evil acts himself, which is a huge objection from unbelievers, or why does God command evil acts to be carried out by others that God commands, which is another big objection from unbelievers, or why does God allow evil acts just in general to be carried out? I think these three questions pretty much take up every category out there from an unbeliever, but they all have the same problem. See, a standard of good and bad is being asserted in those three questions without establishing what the absolute standard is. I'm going to repeat this. Those questions about morality in the Bible all have the same problem. A standard of good and bad is being asserted by the person asking the question without ever establishing what the absolute standard is. So how can one define good and evil in an absolute sense? How can a person say that something is absolutely right or absolutely wrong at all times and in all situations and in all places? At some point, I'm going to challenge Daniel with this very question. What is your absolute standard for measuring what is good and what is evil, right from wrong? So Daniel, I'm giving you a few extra minutes to prepare. While I'm certainly not a mind reader, I can tell you that he'll only be able to answer my question by giving me one of four general responses. He's either going to appeal to personal opinion, he's going to appeal to what benefits society, or he's going to appeal to the laws of society, some type of conventions of society, or he's going to talk about his feelings and what he feels is right or wrong. So when he gives me an answer, it's going to fit into one of those four general responses. And once I give a contradicting answer showing why his response is not an absolute standard, he will either give me another one on the list of four that I just gave you, or he's just going to give up trying. What we'll be able to establish is that any response he gives will fall terribly short of an absolute standard because they're all relative standards. The only way a person can claim that something is absolutely right or wrong is by invoking an absolute standard, which is only possible with God. God created us. God also has an absolute standard of right and wrong that he established for us and wrote in our hearts. Because he created us, he had every right to institute his rules, and we are accountable to him. So only my worldview, the Christian worldview, can account for absolute morality. So let's change gears now. Daniel wants to debate about morality in the Bible. Again, I don't know what he's going to bring up here, especially since I'm going first. As I've established it, this is really an issue about good and evil. Without God, there's no absolute standard of good and evil. But because Daniel claims to be an atheist, according to his worldview, as we have just heard about in the first part of this debate, as I knew what was going to come out, that first part of the debate, he believes that we are the result of materialistic, naturalistic processes, i.e. molecules of man evolution. We somehow evolved millions of years to billions of years ago from random chemical reactions, doing nothing but obeying the laws of chemistry and physics, which, by the way, an evolutionist can't account for either in their worldview. I'm giving this to them as a freebie here. So that means that we, as people, are just the result of random chance processes that evolved based on chemical reactions, obeying laws of chemistry and physics that, again, I'm not asking them to even account for where those came from, but we're the results of this. And so again, we're bags of random chemical reactions doing nothing but obeying the laws of chemistry and physics, which is only capable of producing more chemical reactions doing nothing but obeying the laws of chemistry and physics. This process of humans coming about cannot all of a sudden align itself into an ability for us to reason and think, where we come up with even a relative standard of good and evil, because that would require us to be able to control our thoughts. Us control our thoughts and not be subject to the random chemical reactions that should be coming out of us as they're following the laws of chemistry and physics. So without God, no one can account for any standard of good and evil, and therefore I feel justified in concluding that by a person advocating for a moral standard, he is actually arguing for the Christian God, who makes morality possible. Without an absolute standard for morality, this debate wouldn't even make sense. See, there's no problem of evil in an atheist universe because there's no evil in an atheist universe. For example, the torture of young children is not wrong in an atheist universe. It may be painful to the little kids, but it's not wrong. It is only morally wrong in a theistic universe. If Daniel poses a problem of evil in this way or any other circumstance, the very posing of the problem presupposes my worldview rather than his own. He would be attempting to use evil in an absolute standard way. The reason torturing young children is wrong is because it goes against God's standards. We will see in this debate that any standard that he comes up with will be a relative one and is reduced to nothing more than a preference, a stipulated standard, or a convention. Now, Daniel could get clever and say there's no standard for good and evil or absolute laws of morality, to which he would be right in his atheistic worldview, to which I would respond in the exact same way as Greg Bahnsen did in his debate with Dr. Stein. If there are no more laws of morality, I'd just take out a gun right now and say, okay, Dr. Stein, Daniel, make my day. Is there a God or not? You see, if he says, oh no, you can't murder me because there are laws of morality, of course he has made my day because I've won the debate. That shows that the atheist universe is not correct. And so as we get into this debate today, Daniel has a monumental task of not only showing us how you can get good and evil without God, which is impossible, an absolute standard of good and bad. He also has another problem. If he actually believes what he says, that he is an atheist that is brought about through evolutionary processes, random chemical reactions, doing nothing but obeying the laws of nature, laws of chemistry and physics, then the stuff that he has said over the last hour is nothing but gobbledygook. It is nothing but just random chemical reactions popping off in his brain and causing the normal neuronal reactions to happen in his face and his mouth and his tongue, and just utterances coming out of his mouth that he has no control over, that he has no thought over, and they're doing nothing but obeying the laws of chemistry and physics. So on that, I thank you, and I turn it over to Daniel.
All right, Daniel, you got 10 minutes for your opening statement on morality in the Bible.
I think that was a great opener, Anthony. Good way to start it off. And I think you were right about a lot of things. So you were right about the place that most atheists go. So, but I think that these places are dishonest places. So if you don't believe in a higher power, I agree with you. You do have to believe that morality just evolved, right? And if it just evolves interpersonally, then it's not absolute. It's completely subjective. It's intersubjective, but it's subjective nonetheless. And yeah, so I would fully agree with everything you just said about that. And that's not really the place that I'm coming to attack you today, though. So I know that this is going to come up, and I know that I'm going to have to be honest. Obviously, I'm not going to lie to you and say that, oh, nah, you know. But I want to take your moral system and compare it to your God. So if we take the moral system that you find from Jesus, or actually, you know what, scratch that. I want to take the moral system that you have, that you've taken from the Bible, because everybody's interpretation of the Bible is different, honestly. If you go to the Catholics in Lithuania, they have a completely different moral interpretation of the Bible than you do. So I want to take your interpretation of biblical morality and I want to compare it to your God. Because there's certain things that are just so distasteful to you, me, and literally everybody, every society, everywhere, that I think there's no way that you could say that the morality that is the absolute morality is found in the Bible. And it is just as relative as the law of the jungle, as you would call atheist morality. So first I want to talk about how women are treated in the Bible, like how God treats women. So in Deuteronomy, whenever they, in the laws of governing a tribe, God lays down to Moses was governing rape, right? So basically, if a man, I'm just going to read it straight from. So Deuteronomy 22, 24. If a man finds a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay hold on her, and lie with her, and they be found, then the man that lay with her shall give unto the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he hath humbled her, and he may not put her away all of his days. So this is basically saying, if you rape a woman that's not betrothed to being married, you pay her father, which is actually the same exact price that you'd pay him for a bride. So you broke it, you buy it, you have to keep it, right? So that rape law is legitimately turning this poor woman that got raped into the man's slave for the rest of his life. She belongs to him now. And that's literally the law straight from God. But if a man rapes a woman who is married, he gets stoned to death because it was the man's problem. In the Bible, we can find this all throughout the Bible. Women are treated as chattel. They are not treated as human beings. And this is evidence of that. So another one is in Numbers 31, 15 through 18. Moses, after exacting revenge on the Midianites, commands his army to kill all the boys and every non-virgin woman, but save the virgin women for themselves to keep as sex slaves. So that's God talking through Moses, who was his prophet, saying, hey, kill the Midianites, but keep the women, rape them as much as you want. And I don't think you would consider that moral. So let's see, I got a couple more. Okay, another thing that I want to talk about. So this is going to be the last thing I talk about, and we can go to discussion. I much prefer discussion. But I just want to talk about the very beginning. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and all that. Then he made Adam and Eve, right? He put them in the garden. Adam and Eve didn't have the knowledge of good and evil, right? Because they didn't eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil yet. So they were in a completely innocent state, right? So God puts the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the middle of the garden and says, do not eat, right? They go and they eat it, right? The innocent people that they are. So that would be as if before a baby developed the ability to tell between right and wrong, you put a chainsaw in the room and you said, hey, you better obey me, don't touch that chainsaw. And they touched the chainsaw and it ripped their arm off. It would be your fault, so that would be God's fault. And his punishment, rather than just an earthly punishment and rather than just a punishment towards them, he said, not only am I going to punish you, but every single one of your offspring has this original sin where if you die and you did not confess your faith in Jesus Christ, you burn in hell for eternity. So that is the most unjust thing possible. So no matter what you've done in your life, burning in hell for eternity is unjust. So the whole point of justice is that the punishment meets the crime, right? So whenever a crime is committed, you punish it equivalently. So if a man is a murderer, say a man murders 3 other grown men and he dies, the punishment of eternal hellfire is completely disconnected from that crime. It's a horrible crime, but an eternal punishment can never match earthly crimes. So that is just like the biggest example of God being incredibly unjust to me, especially since there's no Bible verse that people that die that just never heard of Jesus don't burn in hell. So there's African children right now that are going to be born and they're going to die before their first hard meal of starvation, a horrible death. And if we're reading the Bible and we're taking everything from the Bible and not just our presuppositions that God has thought over all of the justice that he could possibly think over, those babies are in hell. And that's evil for anybody that believes that there's morality. And we could open it up for discussion now. That's pretty much all I have to say.
All right. Thank you both for the opening statements on the second topic, morality in the Bible. Now we're going to go ahead and transition to the cross-examination portion of this topic. All right, Dr. Anthony, you have 10 minutes to cross-examine Daniel for 10 minutes.
Okay. Daniel, I do a lot of open air preaching and witnessing college campuses, and these are very familiar verses and passages to me. But I have to go back presuppositionally and ask you the question: why is it wrong in Numbers 31 that God commanded that?
Numbers 31. Which one was that?
That's about Moses and the Midianites.
Oh, the Midianites, the
Yeah.
sex slaves.
Yeah.
So honestly, you're dead right. I don't have an absolute morality that I would say this is wrong. What I would say is we all agree that it's wrong. It all makes us angry. It is all ridiculously, like, if I met a group of people that took people as sex slaves, I would literally want to kill them. Like, that would be my desire. I think that would be most people's desire, because I do think we evolved the desire for a type of justice, right? But I'm not saying that that's based in absolute morality. But would you agree that it is absolutely immoral to keep a sex slave?
I think that everything God does is to his glory. And the problem is that in order to answer,
the sex slaves was to his glory.
In order
like you have to,
everything's to God's glory. And so to be able to answer these questions would take a whole lot longer than what we have here. And the problem is that you have to come at it from a correct understanding of what the Bible teaches. And so you hit on something. Right? You said that you don't think it's fair that God put this tree in the garden and tempted.
Well, let me say something about the last thing before we move on to the fifth quick. So you say everything is for God's glory, but I think that phrase is sort of used as a euphemism. So I think it would be more intellectually honest if you said them keeping those sex slaves was for his glory. But I don't think that you would say that out loud, because there's a cognitive dissonance about saying that particular, like, would you say keeping those sex slaves was for his glory in some way?
So the reason why I'm saying it the way I am is because this is a discussion that two Christians can have and work through the Bible and our understanding of who God is and his attributes to be able to have a proper understanding of what these passages are. But in order to get there, you have to be a Christian. And in order to get there, to be able to understand this passage, we have to have a different starting point than what you have right now. And that starting point is, why is it absolutely wrong? So you can say that lots of people agree rape is wrong.
I don't think that would be this. So
yeah, I mean, you have to give me an absolute standard.
If I was a Christian and you were talking to me,
yeah,
how would you say that worked out? Why did God do that? You would just say he did it for a good reason. We just don't know the reason. Sex slaves, sometimes a necessity.
What I would say is this, without getting into too much details. I don't want to take up all my time on these questions, and you probably don't either on this. But the issue becomes this. R.C. Sproul said it best in his book, Holiness of God, is that we, born with a sin nature, are sinners from conception. And because of our sin, you made a point on the crime needs to be. The punishment must fit the crime. The problem is that when we commit a crime to another human being and we get punished by a human judge, we get a just punishment, jail for life or jail for 10 years or whatever it is. But the problem is every time we do something bad is not just against the person. When we do something bad, we've also sinned against Almighty God, because that person was created in the image of God. And the problem is that God is eternal. God's eternal, therefore his punishment is eternal. So the punishment absolutely does fit the crime, because every sin we do, every time we break a law, we've not just broken against human beings, we've broken against God.
I think that would actually be putting God into a place where he didn't have the ability to portion. Because I think that if you say God is infinite, so his punishment has to be infinite, I feel like that's a horrible argument, because there's plenty of examples in the Old Testament of God not having infinite punishment for finite crimes, and that was before Jesus. And the whole concept of a fiery hell didn't even come about until Jesus. So the Old Testament, fiery hell, we had Sheol. It was not a place of fiery torment. And if you'd like to pull up some Bible verses talking about the hell that's pictured in the New Testament, I would love to see it. Because whenever we really get to we get to weeping and moaning and gnashing of teeth in the is that in the Gospels or in that?
It's one of the Gospels.
It's in one of those. Then once we get to the end, whenever we get to Revelations, that's when you get the lake of fire and the eternal punishment and pain meant for the devil and his servants. But Yeah, the Old Testament, it seemed like God had a bit of proportion in punishment. Sometimes he just killed people straight up, but he did give mercy.
So do you believe that the God of the Old Testament is different than the God of the New Testament?
He's obviously in a better mood in the New Testament.
I mean, he killed Ananias and Sapphira for keeping a little bit of the money back for themselves. Acts 5. So, I mean, we see it. We see it in the New Testament too. Same God. Did that, but
yeah,
same God.
I think. I think it's a very, very different. Okay.
Well, I mean, let me go back.
I do not think, under any circumstance, Jesus would have condoned the keeping of sex slaves. I don't think Jesus would have done that.
But he did.
And I think you could. I think it's safe to sex slaves,
because Jesus didn't just like come into existence 2,000 years ago. Jesus has always been.
Well, okay,
right.
We're talking about the difference between the God of the New Testament and Old Testament.
There is no difference.
New Testament, Old Testament.
Yeah, no, there's no difference. So God, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, three persons, Trinitarian God, has been around since before the beginning of time. So Jesus is there, Holy Spirit is there, Father is there.
So if New Testament Jesus could have condoned sex slaves, why can't I have sex slaves?
Yeah, good question. Except here's the problem. We have to go back to our presuppositions.
Well, no, this is about your presuppositions. I'm saying, from your perspective, why can't I keep sex slaves?
Why can't you?
Forget my presuppositions. Why can't I? Why would you not want me to? Why would it be against your God for me to keep sex slaves?
So let's
be like, God, you commanded multiple people to have sex slaves. King David was a man after your own heart. He had 800 sex slaves, many of which were children. Why can't I have sex slaves? I want to be a man after your own heart. What would you say to a young Christian with sex slaves?
Well, what I would tell you is we've got a couple of issues here. And so, in my questioning, what I asked you is why is hell, and I'm not trying to avoid your question, I'm trying to use my questions up here, is I'm happy to answer your question, even in your section.
You're right, I'm going to stick that in my section.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'll give you time in my section.
I don't mind, because this is a good back and forth, and so I have no problem being gracious. I will answer your question. My issue with all this is that when we're talking about sex slaves, you have a standard that obviously is a good or bad thing. So if you are an atheist, which you say you are, I would say the Bible says you're lying. And for the same reason that I don't believe there's a child in Africa that doesn't know God exists, because the Bible says in Romans 1, every single person knows the true God that exists by his creation, things that have been made. So that's not the issue. The issue is why you as a and I'm not going to say you're lying. I'm not trying to be mean, but let's say pretending is a nice word, right? Is you're pretending to be an atheist. You know God.
Self-deceived.
Self-deceived is a good word. That's a good word. I'll use self-deceived for you. So you're self-deceived. Why would it be a problem to have sex slaves? I mean, why is that an issue?
Yeah. No, and that is a very valid point. And what I would say to that is I would never have sex slaves, because I think that, I feel like that is evil. Like, in my head, there is no part of me that ever would think that was okay.
Yeah.
So it's a result of where I was raised, though. If I was raised in the Middle East, the concept wouldn't be so foreign to me.
Right.
So it is a result of where I was raised. I think if you look all around the world, we have different cultures that have completely different moral values. Like, I would look at female genital mutilation as if it was the worst thing on earth. Like, I would literally want to kill somebody if they did that to anybody that I love.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't kill them, but
I think that is cultural. I think that is a mostly cultural thing. I think it is truly mostly cultural. And how I was raised, I happen to be raised in a Christian background. So the things that I was taught still stick to me as my morality. Like, the things that I was taught are distasteful are still distasteful to me. So I was taught that having sex slaves would be evil, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm just wondering why it's in the Bible and why it's condoned by God, But I do agree with what you're saying, and my answer is I would hate somebody that had sex slaves. I would not have sex slaves, because I, deep in my heart, view it as evil.
Yeah, and that's fine, and that's noble, and I think you're borrowing from the Christian worldview to have that answer, and that's a good thing. But would it be wrong then for the Muslim in a different culture to have a bunch of sex slaves? Is that wrong? Even though your preference and my preference would be, I say your preference and my preference, your feelings and my feelings would say that that's wrong. I would agree with you. But that's not God's standard, right? So we're talking preferences here. I would be speaking as a preference, but I'm doing my best to reflect what God says in his absolute standard. I'm asking for you, would it be wrong, not for you personally, but do you believe it would be wrong for that Muslim to have sex slaves? Because if he says, this is my preference, the way that you, Daniel, says it's my preference not to have sex slaves, that it's wrong. His preference is, this is a wonderful thing. I can propagate my children, strongest survive, survival of the fittest, and I can have tons of children out there for myself. And that would be a really, really, really good thing. So is it wrong for him?
I totally feel what you're saying. To me, whenever we're arguing about this, I just think that wrong would be the wrong word that I would use to describe it. Because I don't believe in absolutes. So I wouldn't say it's wrong because that would be implying an absolute.
You don't believe in any absolutes?
So I would say, not morality-wise. I personally think, okay, so if we look at other animals, right? If we see a lion viciously kill a gazelle, that's a miserable, painful death. If I did that to another human being, that would be considered evil by pretty much every culture ever. But we don't view that as evil. We view that as,
Not every culture.
would you view a lion killing a gazelle? Do you think that would be evil?
No. In fact, I'd go kill a gazelle myself and eat it.
I mean, yeah. So nobody thinks that.
No.
In that aspect, I truly do think that morals are relative, but the morals that I have me sort of not being understanding of other people's morals and actually kind of hating them. Because I think about, I think us in the West, we're especially the golden rule. I think that truly has permeated the West. And we think about how the other person feels. I would think about the plight of that woman that was under sexual slavery, and I just couldn't be down with that. But
right,
you are right. You got me on this one. This particular thing, you pinned me down because that's something I can't escape.
All right, that is 10 minutes for Dr. Anthony. Now you got 10 minutes, Dan, to go ahead and cross-examine Dr. Anthony.
So if I was a Christian, I'm a young Christian, and I have sex slaves. Using your biblical morality, how would you convince me to not have sex slaves?
Yeah.
Even if I treated them good, though, like the Bible says to do, because the Bible does say to treat your slaves good. So.
Yeah. So here's the issue is that I have to foundationally, if you were a Christian and we were having this discussion, I would foundationally have to make sure that you are on solid ground, which means then that I would have to make sure you understood original sin, that you are born with a sin nature, that you are a sinner, that every breath that you've taken since conception, not just birth, but conception, every breath you've taken, every nutrient that's come into your body is a gift of God, and by his grace that you're allowed to breathe. And so I don't know how old you are, I'm assuming early 20s, that you have had, sadly I'm double your age, but every day that you have lived, Daniel, even as you're breathing right now, you are breathing God's grace and his mercy right now on your life. And that you deserved to die back when you were conceived. That knowing your sins against an almighty God, knowing my sins against an almighty God, my question should never be, I deserve to live. Why can't I have better things in life? My question should be, why did God not kill me in my sleep last night, knowing what I did unto yesterday?
How that ties in, though. So first off, I would say, how does that tie into that? And then second off, you're using the word deserve. So you're saying at conception, I deserve to die. I think we have completely different meanings of deserved, because that's a nonsensical statement to me. So a rock can't deserve anything. Before you've done anything, before you've done anything whatsoever, before you've even made a conscious decision, before you've had a thought, you can't deserve things. That's just not how it works. The
issue is we're born with a sinful nature, and so from the moment of conception, goes all the way back to Adam.
So why did God make that sin nature stick? He easily could have killed off that first generation. He chose to have that sin nature stick to us. Because sin doesn't travel through genetics. And I think we both know that. Like, you know, like biblically, like it would be a silly thing to say sin is embedded in our genetics. Sin is a metaphysical thing. It's involved with the spirit. Like, why would God send each spirit down or create each new spirit with sin already embedded in them? Because I'm assuming you believe in life at conception, stuff like that.
Absolutely.
You probably believe that God inserts the spirit into the biological entity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the spirit isn't coming from the natural world thing. So why, when God puts it in there, does he put the sin in there? Because in order for it to have sin, God has to put it in the spirit.
Yeah, I don't believe that. So I believe that we have, so like in Romans 5, or so like presuppositionally, my job isn't to try to make a logical argument from biology. My argument has to start with what the Bible says. And so we read, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. Right? So that is what we see, is that there is a sin nature that started with Adam by sinning, and it was passed to every generation. And here's part of the issue, is that all creation
you're just saying
groans.
that's way to judge it, because that's just how it is. That's how it would be, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the Bible says. So that means that we are born into a sin. We're born into a broken creation. You would agree as much as I would, looking at the creation. It's a broken creation. You know, the lion was never meant to eat the gazelle in the beginning, in the perfect creation. There wasn't supposed to be murders and rapes and all the stuff we see in the broken creation that there is today. Death wasn't even supposed to be part of a perfect creation, and yet we see all these things.
I've not understood how that works for people. So
yeah,
okay, allow it. The teeth of a lion wouldn't allow it. If we go back in the fossil record, every single carnivore has.
I think your videos cut a little
grass.
Every single carnivore has what? I didn't catch it. Your thing went out.
Just take a carnivore and make them eat grass. So you can't take a lion and make it graze in a meadow. It'll die. Its body can't digest.
We don't want to veer too much off topic. This topic is about morality in the Bible, so we don't want to get into the back into the you know. If we can,
you're totally right. I appreciate that, man. I
didn't mind answering them, but yeah,
having a good discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, your video's lagging some, Daniel. It's lagging big time.
Lagging big time.
It just started like a minute ago too.
It just started. I guess somebody's using bandwidth up in there.
Somebody might be on the internet right now.
Are we good?
You seem to be good again, yeah.
You seem to be good.
I'm good again?
Yeah.
I'm doing the debate. Yeah.
It went out again.
We're back.
Yeah, it's going in and out. Let's see. All right, look like you're back now. So let's see if it maintains right there.
Say a quick prayer, y'all. Say a quick prayer.
All right.
All right. So I think that's a little cut. So we could just start on a new topic involving morality.
Okay.
So I know that you would agree that God is good.
Yes.
And
the standard of good.
God is the standard of good, right? So if the standard of something does something, does that mean that thing exactly is good?
I guess you'd have to explain it further for me to know what you mean by that. So, I mean, he created Adam and Eve, but it doesn't make...
So things that we would intuitively say in the Bible, we go, hey, that's not very good. You know, so like the sex slaves, that's one of them. One good one is, can you cut that real quick? But I want to ask you a question about abortion. Is that okay?
Fine by me. I mean, because it's on topic, so yeah.
So do you agree that abortion is wrong and it's murder?
Yes.
Let's do a quick answer with this first one. Why do you think abortion is wrong? Like, is it like a sanctity of life thing? God inserts the soul into the embryo. It's a new creation. It's not yours to take.
Well,
along those lines.
Quick answer for you since you asked for it. Murder is wrong. It's one of the 10 Commandments. And number 2, life begins at conception. That's it. So if any abortion is murder, and so therefore it's wrong.
How do you feel about the Bible verse regarding abortion? Have you ever heard that one?
Go ahead and tell me.
So God says that he said, if you suspect,
where are you at?
I'm gonna pull it up. I think it's in Deuteronomy.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I had to shut down all of my tabs that I had open to open this. So I'm okay. The bitter water. Okay. So it is in Numbers 5, right? So Numbers 5, it begins with talking about if you suspect that your wife has been unfaithful, right? So it says if you suspect that your wife has been unfaithful, bring her to the temple and get the priest to prepare bitter water. And it says if she has made herself impure and has been unfaithful to her husband, implying that the pregnancy was caused by the unfaithfulness, this will be the result. When she is made to drink the water brings a curse and bitter suffering. It will enter her, and her abdomen will swell, and her womb will miscarry, and she will become cursed. So basically, the Bible verse is saying, hey, if you suspect that your wife has cheated on you, it says, even if you suspect and you have no proof, bring her to the temple, get her to drink the poisonous water that makes her womb swell and the baby miscarry. Would that change? That's New King James I'm reading from.
Yeah, so I think there's better renderings of that verse in other Bible translations.
No, we could read it in everyone. So the NI, which one do you like?
So ESV or NASB would be my favorite.
NASB.
Yeah.
New American Standard.
Yeah.
That's what it is. New American Standard.
New American Standard. Yeah.
When he has made her drink the water, then it shall come about, if she defiled herself and was unfaithful to her husband, that the water which brings a curse will go into her and cause bitterness, and her abdomen will swell, and her thigh will waste away, and the woman will become a curse among her. That is misleading. Like that.
Yeah,
I'm telling you that.
I don't think that's an abortion passage, but the issue.
No. All the other translations say it. So with the newer translations, I genuinely think people insert their own opinion. Like when was the New American Standard Bible penned?
Well, this
one
was
that a relatively new one.
This one's 95, but the issue becomes textual criticism, which is a whole different debate. So the NASB and ESV would both agree. So I'm trying to pull up some stuff for you here, but I mean, really, this verse is not about. This verse doesn't appear to be about abortion. This verse is about adultery, and so. So,
what would make you think that the verse isn't about an abortion? So it's about the baby. It's a cursed bitter water that will make her belly swell. And then in most of the translations, it says, and the baby will be miscarried. So I think that if you look at the context is talking about if your wife cheated on you and she becomes pregnant, why would the becoming pregnant matter unless it was an abortion?
Yeah.
So the pregnancy should have no meaning if it's just the value of the adultery.
I think what it has to do is her being barren versus unbarren is what I think that text is actually pointing to. Now, I will tell you that this text is one that is
barren, like it's in instantaneously barren once she's already pregnant for the baby.
No, having the ability to be pregnant or not in the first place is what I would say is what that is meaning there.
Well, it says if she is pregnant and you suspect that it is for another man, bring her to the temple. So she's already pregnant. You're bringing her to the temple, getting her to drink the poisonous water, and that wouldn't be causing her to be barren. That would be causing the pregnancy to end, and then maybe her become barren.
So my dispute with this verse and this passage specifically is going to be that this is a perplexing one, right? So you have different theologians that have viewed this in different ways, and so here's what I can say confidently. Number one, I don't believe this is an abortion passage. Number two, even if you believe that it's an abortion passage, there's a grander issue that's at stake here. And the grander issue isn't necessarily about abortion or about murdering of children that you see in the Old Testament or anything else. The issue is what is the standard of good and bad or right from wrong? That's really what this comes down to. And so even beyond the idea of we can debate on whether it's an abortion or not, that's not the issue. The issue is that even in your worldview, if God commanded an abortion to occur in the Old Testament, why would that be wrong? I mean, that's what I have to keep coming back to.
What I'm saying though is like what I'm getting to with mine is your morals don't actually come from the Bible, in my opinion. And the reason why I say that is because you're against abortion, even though there's no biblical passage that says life starts in conception. It says he formed you in the womb, all that. No, doesn't say you have a soul in the womb.
No, there's several that says that.
I'd like to see them.
You knit me together, my mother's womb is one.
No, I just said that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a spirit involved. He might insert the spirit out. Like, there's no direct thing saying that. And then 30% of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. So why did God design it to where 30% of babies are aborted in the womb? And then also in the Bible, there's multiple occasions of God killing an unborn baby in the womb. Like one of which is whenever King David and
Well, like I said, the issue is why is it bad?
He strikes a baby down.
Why is it good or bad to begin with in your worldview? I mean, look, miscarriages are near and dear to me. I have one child.
Why is abortion wrong?
Yeah, I have one child, and we've had at least 4 miscarriages that we know of, and that part's devastating. But here's the thing: I believe God is good, and that whatever happens is to His glory in the end, and He always knows right from wrong. He's not going to sin. He can't sin. He's always going to do good. But we have to have the right foundation to even have this discussion, and that is, how do we know from an absolute sense right from wrong? My morality is not my morality of my own. My morality can only be a reflection of what God says in His Word. And if my morality differs from that, I'm the one that's wrong, not God. And that would be me. Yeah. That would be me not having a correct understanding of what God's morality is.
So you believe God is accurate in that question?
So
I think we got each another 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, we do. So Dr. Anthony, you have 10 minutes to cross-examine Daniel.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we'll continue on that if you want to continue on that more. I guess this all comes down to, again, if you were a Christian, I would be happy to have these earnest discussions with you, because as long as we have the same foundations of what I was starting to explain before about origins, about our sin natures, about us not being good people by nature but bad, and deserving of God's wrath, that's our starting point. But so I'm going to ask you this question as kind of an offshoot, and then I'm going to kind of come back to this. And I think this is an important question, and I'm sorry if you feel like I'm being unfair, but I don't believe at all, according to the Bible, that you were a Christian to begin with. I believe that you played Christian, you were raised Christian, but you were never saved, because I don't believe that somebody can lose their salvation. I believe that that once you're saved, you're sealed by the Spirit, as we read in the beginning of Ephesians. So I don't believe you're saved. No, I think it's just what the Bible teaches. I mean, I know there are people who want to pin it to different theological systems.
My dad believes that way too, so he's always not concerned about my soul, because he's like, you're still saved. Yeah. So my debate would be, I don't believe that you are saved if you say you've walked away from the faith. You no longer believe who Jesus is. So that would be my first contention. But here's my question then: is what happens in your life
that caused you to say, today I'm a Christian and today now I'm not? What happened? Sincerely, I mean, what happened?
It wasn't any. So sincerely, it wasn't any hardships. Like I know a lot of people, they turn away from God because they're having hard times in their life, and they're like, God, why are bad things happening to good people? You know, like, but I was never like that. I've always understood that, because if you're a Christian, anything that happens bad to you is still good, because you die and you go to heaven. So whenever you compare infinite reward to any amount of pain, it's zero. You know, it's negated. So I never had that problem. But the problem that I did have was evolution, the age of the earth, like all the things that we were talking about in the previous discussion. So one huge thing for me is that whenever I found out that that like stars were billions of light years away, I found that out probably when I was like 12, and that just plagued me. I was like, that doesn't make sense. The earth it can't be 6,000 years old. So then I eventually was led away from the 6,000 years old, and I believed in the 13.8 billion years, as the astronomers and radiometicians said, right? But then I got to a point where once I believed in that, I started being more intrigued in science. I started studying biology, chemistry, physics, like all that. And eventually I just got to the point where I was like, man, if the Bible was real, it would know about all this. Like, I just think that if a divine creator came down and said, hey, here's my good and perfect book, I think this good and perfect book would have respect for women. It would have women's rights. It would not have the condoning of women being raped. I think the God would have, I think you can agree that us currently, we have a better moral standard than the Israelites did back in the day, whenever they were raping and pillaging. And that did not come about via more divine revelation, because we got all the divine revelation we could get about the rules back then. Jesus didn't really come for the rules. Jesus came for salvation, but the Old Testament was the rules. So even though the rules have stayed, like the rules that morality has become, respect women, we love and protect the innocent, we do all kind of things that they never would have dreamed about back in the day. And I think that is because morality doesn't truly evolving social norm that, thank goodness, it's pointing in the way. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, you've got the same problems. If you say morality is evolving, that means there's no absolute standard, which means all you've done is giving me a bunch of reasons why all these things are wrong and why you didn't believe the Bible, but you don't have a standard in your worldview to be able to judge whether they're right or wrong to begin with. And that would be that's my point of contention. Yeah, but that's my point of contention. All this is that basically your argument really doesn't amount to anything at all, because in your worldview you can't even evaluate anything of the Bible, and so I have to go back.
Like, basically, everything that I'm saying, though, is like, I am not trying to evaluate your morals with my morals, or the Bible's morals with my morals. I'm trying to evaluate your morals with the Bible's morals. So your interpretation of biblical morality, I think, is completely separated from what the Bible actually is, what God actually is. And I think that if you truly believe God is good, and you truly stuck to everything the Bible said as if it was ground truth, and you were completely intellectually honest, I think that you would say, okay, rape can be okay. Child slaves, all bonds are okay. Genocide is okay. Like, it would literally be an infinite list of things that are okay subjectively. You know, because, not subjectively, but sometimes, it'd be sometimes okay. It wouldn't be absolute morality. Like, I think that if you were truly intellectually honest with the whole Bible, you would see the Bible as a book of relative morality, where there's a dictator like God that just does whatever he wants, evil, good, sometimes bad. He's very moody, very capricious. And yeah, so I'm just saying that with your worldview and your morality, I think it completely clashes with the Bible. I think you're probably a great person. You're probably a great father. You probably love your wife, love your kids. And I just don't think that the God that you worship would be as good of a guy as you.
Well, I could never be God, obviously, and I think God is infinitely better than who I am. Appreciate your compliment, but this really is a worldview issue. You're viewing what you read in the Old Testament through your atheistic eyes, right? Without an absolute standard of morality, right? So you're viewing something that you don't have the proper context for, the proper background with, or of, and you're doing it with a sliding scale or a moving scale of morality, to which you can't actually judge anything based on where you're at. And so
I fully agree with you. That's why I'm not even trying to use my moral scale. Because honestly, like whenever it came to morality, like this debate, I was thinking, and I don't really have firm stances of morality. That's why I have to try to show. Yeah, exactly.
You can't, it's impossible unless you start with
God. If you're intellectually honest, I fully agree for absolute morality.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do have opinions about morality, but I'm not going to say them on here. Like, in my opinion, I believe that we have certain moral truths that are truths with a lowercase t and are absolutely relative. So by absolutely relative, human invention, right? Biologically based, that sort of are agreed upon by all humankind. Everybody thinks it's wrong to murder. Like, there's no society where it's just like murdering an innocent person for no reason is good. So that's one of the absolute relative truths of morality, like, in my opinion. And that's how I believe morality is conceived. And then me personally, I think of other people. I'm an empathetic person. So whenever I think about consequentialist moral decisions, I think, what's the best for the best amount of people? And that's just basically how I live my life.
Right. And so as I said earlier, to be able to try to justify any type of morality, people are going to do exactly what you just did, exactly as I predicted, right, in my opening statement. You're either going to use personal opinion, what benefits society or the most members of society, the laws of society.
Well, I'm not actually trying to use that, though.
No, I know you're not. But even in your relative, even as you're trying to give your own justification for your relative scale, you're still begging on one of these four things. And the point of all this, comes back to...
I'm not begging on anything, though, because I am saying that it's relative. Like, I am agreeing with you that it's completely relative and it is subjective and it's interpersonal.
Then how are you able to evaluate the Bible and God? If it's all relative. I told you that.
Like, I've told you, like, how I'm attacking this. Like, I'm literally just using your morals to disagree with biblical principles. So, conclusion that abortion is wrong. In the Bible, God does abortion and it's okay. That is a conflict.
Let me give
God's
you
all powerful, so he does what he wants. But I don't think power might shouldn't equal right. And I think that that's just immoral. If by your stance, say a more powerful person should be allowed to kill people if they want, while a weaker person shouldn't. So if we extend this and extrapolate it to where it's an all-powerful deity, he shouldn't just be able to remove life and send people to eternal darkness and fire for no reason.
Why not? He created you. I mean, here's the issue: is that God created you and I, whether you believe it or not, or you want to admit it or not. I mean, God created us. He sets the standards for us. Because of our sin nature, we don't deserve anything good in this life. And so whatever happens to us, we still had his grace and mercy up until that point when we do die.
I think,
and so anything that happens to us...
God play tennis without the net. Like, I think you're really letting God play tennis without the net, because I think so if God, hypothetically, made an organism that could feel pain and tortured it for no reason, like literally just made it to torture it, you still couldn't say that's evil, because you'd say, no, that's good, because God did it. And if you say that's good, your moral should say, wait, if that's good and God is the moral rule giver and he is the standard of good, that should be good for me. I should be creating organisms to torture them. Like, I should be having babies so I could torture them. Like, but that's not what you do. Because
I'm not God,
even though you say God is the standard of good, you're saying he's the standard of good. So but by that, you're not actually using the word standard appropriately. Like, you're saying that no matter what God does, no matter how bad I think it is, it's good, but it's not good for anybody else. It's good in an abstract way that has nothing to do with humans.
What I'm saying is that we aren't God, right? So, and we have finite minds. And so if I read something in the Bible that I don't understand to begin with, right, and I look at it and say, this doesn't sound right, this seems to go against the character of God, what I'm not going to do is say, the Bible must be wrong. What I'm going to say is, I must be wrong. My interpretation must be wrong. So I must figure out, knowing who God is and his attributes, which are clearly on display in Scripture, how is this passage properly interpreted?
So
That's where I have to go with it.
Bible is right. How do you know the Bible is right?
Well,
because I mean, the Bible, if we look at it, it was canonized by a group of people that you probably don't agree with. I don't know if you're Catholic, but I think we could both agree that the early Catholic Church was pretty corrupt, right?
They're still corrupt.
Like they were incredibly corrupt.
Yeah.
And the early Catholic Church was who canonized the Bible that we have today.
Well, I mean, that's the claim people make. I would disagree with that claim.
Well, in what way?
Well, people want to lay it upon the feet of Constantine, right, in the third, fourth century times, and they want to say that this is when the Catholic Church officially recognized the Bible. I would say these letters were already long written. We already had guys that were gathering these letters early second century that make up what we would see as the modern Bible today. So I don't put any of this on the Catholics and giving them any credit whatsoever in canonizing the Bible whatsoever. The number two is, this is a whole different debate, but you look at textual criticism and you understand. By the way, if you give me your address off air, I'm happy to send you a copy of my book and a couple others if you promise me you'll read them.
I promise you.
If you promise me to read them, I will send you those books.
We'll make for a better debate next time, too.
Well, yeah, you'll know a little bit more about my position. But
we should do another debate about the Bible itself, if you'd be down for that, honestly.
Yeah, we can talk to Marlon about it. I got some busy times coming up real soon, but I'd be happy to talk about something like that in the future. It's just, this is the area of textual criticism. This is the area of understanding God's method of preserving his word. It's also the understanding of how we look at the Bible. I mean, you'll see all my cards because they're all in my book. You'll know everything that I'm going to argue, and I will still have no problem sending you the book ahead of time before the debate, because you won't be able to argue against what's in there. Yeah.
All right. So we have one more 10-minute cross-examination for Daniel, and then that will conclude this cross-examination.
Okay.
All right. We did talk about a lot. Okay. So, in what way is God the standard giver? Because if God commands past people to do something, how do you know that you can't do it anymore? So like if God never gives a command against something that he previously has allowed, how do we know that it's wrong now? So one example would be sex slaves. So we know that he was okay with it in the past at certain points, and we know that he had never talked against it, right? He never gave a command against it. So how do you know that that's wrong? Because I think you agree that that's wrong.
So again, we have a problem. I'm just going to mention it again. You're saying we would agree it's wrong, but you don't have a standard to judge it by.
You would agree it's wrong. Why do you think it's wrong?
So I would say, first of all, God is he doesn't change. He's immutable. But we have to understand, and I'm not just talking about your issue of concubines here. I'm talking about in general, because these are the arguments that atheists, proclaiming atheists would make, is that they would say the God of the Bible, the God of the Old Testament is different than God of the New Testament. His rules are different, right?
Can we stick to the particular example though? It's for a purpose.
So for your particular example, just because God doesn't come out and say, Solomon, this is absolutely wrong, doesn't mean that it's not wrong. Just because it happened and it allowed to happen in God's sovereign, just because it happened as a result of the sinfulness of man for those things to happen.
So you're saying just because he didn't correct it, but where are you getting that it's wrong now? So where are you pulling that from? Are you pulling that from your gut?
Oh no. So we have to go back to Genesis, and when Jesus was asked the question in Matthew 19 about divorce and remarriage, he went back to Genesis the same way I'm going to. He quoted directly from Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. He quoted from Genesis 1 that in the beginning God made the male and female, and then he quotes from Genesis 2 that what God has joined together, let not man separate, right?
Yeah.
Marriage is clearly defined way back in the beginning as one man and one woman. And so that would be our absolute starting point. We see do not commit adultery as a commandment.
But we got to look at what do not commit adultery meant. So do not commit adultery didn't mean for men to not go have sex with unmarried women. Adultery was whenever you had sex with a married woman.
No, it's when you're married yourself and having sex with somebody else. That's adultery.
No. Well, that's what we consider adultery, but what they consider adultery was different. They didn't have the onus on the man at all.
David committed adultery and he was punished for it.
Why did David commit adultery? It's because she was married to
you're right.
Old guy that died.
Yeah, the old guy. No, the adultery, as we would read in the Ten Commandments, is about you being married and having sex with somebody else. So if you're unmarried,
somebody committing adultery. So whenever Abraham had sex with his slave, God didn't call that adultery. He didn't. There's never an example in the Bible.
Well, just because he didn't call it.
And she was his. So anytime a man had sex with an unmarried woman in the Bible, they never called it adultery. God calls a lot of things in the Bible adultery, but it is never a man having sex with an unmarried woman. It's always whenever the woman is somebody else's property.
Just because he didn't call it adultery doesn't make it not adultery. As you can see, that the child he had that wasn't Sarah's was not the one that was in the royal line anyway.
Why did David commit adultery whenever he had sex with Bathsheba, but not whenever he had sex with his concubines?
He did have adultery with every one of them. It just wasn't mentioned. It just wasn't mentioned.
But there's no mention in the Bible of that ever happening. Like if you have sex with a woman that belongs to you, it's never been called adultery in the Bible.
Okay.
And there's so many examples of it, and nobody ever calls it out ever, even though it's completely rampant. It seems like if God was still directly communicating to his people, and their king was having sex with children that were his slaves, you would expect that to be more of an evil than him consensually having sex with Bathsheba.
I think first of all, your view of evil is not an absolute standard. But number two, let's pretend it was. How do you define evil? And how do you define sin? Sin would be
you agree that's wrong. You agree that the.
But what I'm saying is that on one hand, you can say one sin is worse than another, right? On one hand, you can say that. On the other hand, every sin is a sin. And so I'm not going to say that why did God choose to punish somebody here and not do it these times? Why did he punish somebody here and not do it these times? I don't know that answer. What I do know is that every single time somebody sins, it's wrong and it's a sin against God. And just because he doesn't call it out every single time doesn't make it not a sin. It just means he didn't call it out for whatever reason.
Oh, I got a good one. I got a good rebuttal. Wait for
that. Please.
So whenever the Canaanites were slain and the sex slaves were taken, right? So pretty much all Jewish men of fighting age were married. Like they didn't have a culture like we do. They did not have singles. So you had an army of men taking sex slaves that God commanded them to take, right? They obviously had sex with their sex slaves. Did God command them to commit adultery? And if so, did he just give them a free pass?
The problem is that you have inserted a couple of assumptions in there that we can't justify biblically. So I can't even answer the question because you've assumed that every single person going off to war is married.
I didn't say every single one.
Okay. Well, you've made that assumption. You made the assumption that God commanded them to have sex with slaves, with the sex slaves.
Well, he said take them as sex slaves.
Well, he says to take them. So, but the point is there's some assumptions there.
As sex slaves.
Yeah. My point is there's assumptions in there, and that's something I can't really answer.
I think we both know that the assumptions are completely sound, though.
Not necessarily.
You think out of the entire army, they took the entire female population that was virgins of the Canaanites, And you think that enough, like it just wouldn't make sense like that. Like they
look, see, the problem is we can't read into what Scripture, right? We can only read what Scripture tells us, and I can clearly tell you that marriage is between one man and one woman. I can clearly tell you that adultery is wrong. But not only is adultery wrong when you sleep, have sex with somebody that's not your wife, but Jesus exposed that for even more than what it is. Or give us a deeper understanding of it, which is if you even have lustful thoughts about another woman. He doesn't say if you have thoughts about a single woman or an unmarried woman. You have thoughts about another woman, that's committing adultery in your heart, right? So adultery is defined as you being married having sex with somebody else. If you are unmarried having sex with somebody, that would be fornication, which would be a different category. Still sin, still sexual sin, still sin that God would call against your own body as well as against him. I just think you're defining adultery incorrectly.
One thing I just want to say that I thought was interesting, and I found this out while I was still a Christian, but
yeah.
So the New Testament, it condemns fornication twice, right? And both of them, it's sort of like they're listing a bunch of sins, and they say, fornicator shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. The other one says like something about fornication, but both of the words are porneia. Like that's the word for fornication that's used. And porneia actually means incest and bestiality. So it doesn't actually mean interpersonal sex between two non-married individuals. But that's beside the point. I'm sure the Bible does condone. It says do not lay your hands on a woman.
Yeah. When you go to the Greek and the Hebrew, you'll see that all these categories are covered. You're actually correct. I mean, that's a good word to be able to bring up when you're talking to the homosexual crowd, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's one that we will often use, but you have to go back to the Greek to understand it.
How do you feel about how do you feel about drunkenness? Is it a sin to get drunk?
Yes.
So, Jesus' first miracle, turning water into wine. So it says, like, I could pull it up exactly, but I'm just going to paraphrase for now.
I'm very familiar. I have to use this all the time.
Okay, yeah. So it says, whenever he brought the wine out, they said, usually you save the good wine, you save the bad wine for whenever people are drunk, and then you give it to them. You saved the good wine for them, saying, you usually give drunk people bad wine, but you gave the drunk people good wine. Mm-hmm. So that wasn't just Jesus turning water into wine and giving it to them for them to sip on. It was him giving already drunk people the stuff to get drunker. So is that him condoning drunkenness?
Yeah, good question. Jesus didn't make them drink more wine. All Jesus did in that passage is he turned water into a really fine tasting wine.
So you're saying he just was the supplier, but I feel
he just supplied
saying, it. I didn't make him do the drugs. I just sold it to him. Like I feel like that
sell it to him. There was a barrel.
Well, I didn't do drugs. I just gave it.
He turned into wine. And so even somebody. I mean, look, even somebody who, back before I was saved and I got drunk and I sinned against God when I did those things. Even before you get drunk, if you have a taste of, you always drink your better wine first.
Yeah,
because your taste buds are most active.
Well,
once you have even a little bit of wine, it changes your taste buds. So even your argument, I can have an explanation for. Even though I don't agree with your arguments, I could easily apply it to non-drunkenness.
So Jesus, they were already drunk. Jesus knew they wanted the wine to get drunker.
No, no, it doesn't say that. All it says is he turned water into wine. It was a fine tasting wine.
Okay, I think that's a little bit. I feel like that's like
all it says in the text.
You think that the all-powerful God of the universe didn't know that drunk people wanting more wine was to drink it? Like I feel like that's like absurd. Like
the all-powerful God of the universe stuck, just like you said in the beginning, stuck a tree that he said, "Do not eat from it," while in the midst of a garden that had the most luscious fruits and vegetables you could ever imagine.
So it was a moral test. It was Jesus wanted to see if they would stop their drunken debauchery.
I'm not saying it's a moral test either. All I'm saying is that he turned water into a fine-tasting wine. And the wine master...
That's drunker, though.
And the wine master is the one who said... that it was a fine-tasting wine. Now, you have to also remember the culture. Weddings weren't just like what we do today, where we have a 3 or 4 hour drunken fest, right? Weddings of that day went for like a week, and so you could conceivably have a few drinks for several days in a row, and then have the really fine wine last. Now, I'm not saying that I'm making that argument from the text. I'm also saying from the text, the only thing the text says is he turned water into fine tasting wine.
I know that sounds like it was off topic, but I just wanted to bring that up as a moral disparity between you and Jesus, in my opinion. And I think that most people hearing that would be like, hey, that is a moral disparity, you know?
All right. Thank you guys for that cross-examination. A lengthy debate. But I have one question. I have one question that has to do with the moral position. Are there any, as we, you guys discussed all the negative ramifications of trying to, place God in a negative moral light? When we talk about morality, is there a positive light when it comes to issues of pain and suffering?
Oh yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Is there a positive light because typically when we get these morality debates, obviously the person who doesn't believe in God tends to try to paint God as a moral monster. Mm-hmm. All the negative aspects, or what the atheist position might interpret as a negative aspect. So in that same breath, are there positive aspects? Would you, as an atheist, Daniel, say there are positive aspects to the pain and suffering that we may see in the Old Testament, if you will?
So if I want to put my Christian cap on real quick, and we look at pain and suffering in the Old Testament and New Testament, there are plenty times of pain and suffering that had a great purpose. So if we look at Job, so Job suffered, but it wasn't for nothing. Jesus suffered, it wasn't for nothing. There's plenty of examples of suffering that were very substantive. And I don't have a problem with those. I don't have a problem with interpersonal pain that makes you grow and reveals God's glory and whatnot. The only pain and suffering that I have a problem with is the ones that seem completely auxiliary, nonsensical, added in.
All right. So I have a follow-up question there. So in that same breath, do you believe, well, obviously you don't believe in God, but if God has an overall purpose and things happen for a reason, you see instances where it happens for a reason, isn't that consistent to have that same thinking for all the suffering that you may read in the Bible? Or do you believe that you're being selective you're being selective and picking out particular portions that does not fit with your worldview, instead of viewing the text consistently throughout?
Well, so I don't have the problem of having to view this text consistently because I don't think it's a consistent book. I think that it's a coagulation of many books that seem very contradictory to one another. But I lost my train of thought on that. Can you repeat the last end of the question?
Yeah, I was saying, do you believe that are you treating the text consistently throughout the whole Bible? We see instances of pain and suffering in a variety of forms throughout the Bible. And you're picking out, for example, you said the sex slaves, which I think you have some interpretive challenges there. I don't think sex slave is correct term to be using there. Yep. Because historically speaking, there's been whenever the Israelites brought women into or took women in, is usually because the women don't have anything. They have no help whatsoever. So potentially in the Near Eastern section in context, it would take women in order to help them.
So why would you kill the non-virgin ones before you did that, though? So I get what you're saying, but and that would be a more convincing argument if God didn't say, hey, but before you take those women, I want you to murder the ones that aren't virgins. Because he directly says, now kill all the boys and all the women who have slept with a man. That's pretty straightforward.
It's probably God in that particular context, if I'm not mistaken, is punishing sin. So the whole idea is that God, being God, has the right to do as he pleases with his creation. And I think that's the big dilemma. Well, the heart is obviously the overall dilemma, but I think that that's part of the intellectual imbalance or treatment of the biblical text from the atheistic position, is that they're not being consistent. You know what I mean? They're not treating it consistent. Now, if I'm asking for a quote unquote positive ramification of something that we would consider pain and suffering in the Bible, then I think that we should see that as the overall umbrella, the overall arching system that God has an overall purpose for the suffering that he allows, whether the atheists agree with it or not.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying, but so from my perspective, the book is either a perfect book or it's not a perfect book. So most Christians claim is that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have one error, it's no longer the inerrant word of God. And if you have a perfect, just, good God, and he has one moment of injustice, he's no longer a just God. So whenever I pick apart these particular examples, it's because that, like, to me, that destroys the facade of perfectness in the Bible. So if you say God is perfect, God is perfectly revealed in the Bible, God also encouraged sex slave keeping. Like, to me, that's a directly contradictory statement.
All right, but
unless, of course, your starting point's wrong.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the issue, is that your starting point's wrong.
So what would be your starting point from that? Like I feel like we still haven't got to that. Like, how would you explain that? You would say it's just all in the plan, and the sex slaves was just a part of his plan.
Well, as I said earlier, if there's something we don't understand, the basic rules of hermeneutics would say that we take the plain things to be the plain things, right? Main things to be main things. The things that are clearly understood, things like God's attributes, clearly understood. There's nothing we're going to find in the Bible that will contradict God's attributes. So therefore, if we read something the first time as a baby Christian and see, well, this doesn't look so good, God doesn't look so good here, who's wrong? It ain't God. It ain't the Bible.
Well, it would
be the young Christian.
I would have agreed with what you said back in the day about texts that were convoluted and confusing, but these are very straightforward. So these are not convoluted and confusing. These are very, very direct. Like,
only when you're out of the general context of the Bible. I mean, you have an immediate context and you have a larger context of the entire Bible. So and that's you're not being consistent with what we would say would be a proper context, both close to the passage as well as further away from the passage.
I think one that is as clear as possible in the it's in the Mosaic Law. God tells Moses that if a woman has sex with a man and on her wedding night she does not bleed, she does not have her first blood, the man should bring the evidence that she didn't have the first blood, and they should stone her at her father's doorstep. Right? So you're stoning a woman because she had sex with somebody, right?
It's a sin.
Actually, what we know now, though, is not all women bleed when they have sex for the first time. Back in the day, they thought every virgin bled whenever you had sex for the first time. Now we know that 10% of women do not bleed whenever they have sex for the first time. So that means that God's justice gave down a law that completely punished 10% of women erroneously. Like he punished them for not having hymens built to bleed, which is a large portion of the population.
But you're missing a major thing here. Okay, I agree with you that hymens are not as strong as what we would hope them to be today, or however you want to state it, right? We know that somebody who is a very good athlete and one that has really pounded their body as a female may have broken it early on, okay? But there's something missing here. You would agree as much as I would about genetic entropy. So even if what you're saying is completely true, I don't think it's as high as 10%. I think it's a smaller percentage than that. But
I could say from experience, it's pretty high. I'm joking.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's okay. I get it from your worldview. The issue is that go back in time with genetic entropy, and I would say that if that is even the case, that the hymens aren't as strong today, they would have been a whole lot stronger. You go back 3,000-4,000 years.
I just think that's an unfounded claim. I feel like that's very unfounded.
Genetic entropy is very well known. 50 to 100 mutations every generation.
Genetic entropy and the weakening of a hymen is a completely different thing. So just because you have genes that mutate doesn't necessarily mean that they become weaker. Like, that's just a complete spitball hypothesis to justify God's.
I would say that's a biblical presupposition and a working out of the entire universe running down as we read in Hebrews. So, but that's off topic. The issue is that you asked a question about why God would have that woman stoned. Obviously, God is just, God is fair, God is good, and there is a reason why that he believed that every woman should be stoned in that instance. And so I can't answer for God because I'm not God and I don't have an infinite mind like God does.
This is a great example though. So if I had sex with a woman and she confessed to me that she wasn't a virgin and it was on our wedding night, I was a virgin, she claimed she was a virgin, she's not a virgin, right? If I stoned her, you would think that that was immoral and you would think that I would go to jail. But why would your belief in that contradict what the Bible's law states?
Because you aren't God.
The law. He did.
But you're not God. That's the lie.
It wasn't God stoning them. It was God commanding them to stone them. So God didn't stone each individual one. He said, hey, if a woman is not a virgin whenever you have sex with her the first time, stone her. So that's him telling all future generations, hey, when this happens, stone them. Because he...
No. Okay, so now this is a whole different issue for a different show, I'm sure. But there are some laws and some dictates that were for specific people at a specific time. And as a quick answer, God had the
laws of governing a tribe. So those are meant to be very generalized.
Yeah, that's part of a whole different discussion. And again, that would be a discussion to have with a Christian, because they would have to have the right foundation in order to understand that properly.
Well, I completely disagree with you with the inability to understand because you're not a Christian. I think if you laid down, because like I can think from a Christian worldview. I was a Christian for most of my life, and I could see how if you had an axiomatic belief in the Bible, you would believe certain things to be true. So if I believed that the Bible were perfectly good and perfectly true, and God was perfectly good and perfectly true, and that was my axiom, I could see how I'd have the same exact beliefs as you.
Yeah. I mean,
in order to do that, reasoning has to not be one of your axioms. Like, I don't think you can have a true axiom of the Bible and a true axiom of reason. I think that they are mutually exclusive axioms.
1 John 2:19 says, they went out from us, but they were not really of us. For if they had been of us, they would have remained with us. But they went out so that it would be shown that they are all not of us.
There's another one that
means
says the same thing.
Yeah, that means that you were never a Christian, that you looked like it. You may have played the part for a little while. And you didn't walk away from the Christian faith. You were never actually a Christian to begin with. You just walked away from maybe some beliefs of Christianity that you were raised with. So I don't accept the presupposition that you were once a Christian, you had an ability to understand these things, and you walk away from it.
I see what you're saying. I would completely disagree with you though, because whenever I was a Christian, I was a fervent Christian. I was studying the Bible. I wanted to be a pastor.
Yeah. That's a great topic too.
It's like going into another topic there, but all right, so we're gonna close this out. Appreciate y'all. All right, so start with Dr. Anthony, if you want to give a closing statement.
Yeah, we got 10 minutes for this too, right?
Yeah.
Up to 10 minutes. Okay. So, okay, Daniel. Again, thank you both for this debate. It's I've enjoyed the time talking and debating. And Daniel, look. I don't care much for debates. People ask me to debate all the time, to debate Christians, to debate. The only time I'll even think about a debate is when it's with an atheist, and it's not because I care about debating. It's that I care about your soul, and so my closing is obviously pre-written, like my other two opening statements were, and I'm going to just kind of read it, and then I'm just going to talk to you. You know, both topics that we debated today are nearly identical. While on the surface, one seems to be about science and the second about morality, they are essentially the same. When arguing for or against a young earth, it's not a science issue. When arguing about morality in the Bible, it is not about establishing a philosophical construct for the morality, which you would agree with. They're both part instead of a worldview issue. In my worldview, God created everything 6,000 years ago, as I stated earlier, a perfect creation that was marred by Adam and Eve, specifically Adam and the sin of eating from the tree. Because of Adam's sin, death, disease, famine, all the bad things entered into this creation that we live in today. Every single person in this world can look around, as I said earlier, and observe a broken creation. We know death isn't good. Why? It wasn't meant to be there in the first place. And God's going to eradicate it. He says the last enemy to be destroyed is death in 1 Corinthians 15:26. Yet, only in my worldview, as I think we both acknowledged here, is that only in my worldview can we evaluate things with an absolute moral standard. Murder is wrong. Stealing from someone is wrong. raping is wrong. In the worldview of Daniel, life has no meaning. Murder, stealing, and rape isn't absolutely wrong. Your worldview, Daniel. It's just merely a preference, as you admitted multiple times. But what might be wrong for the rapee is preferentially right for the rapist, right? If we don't have an absolute standard, this would be the case. On top of that, murder, rape, and stealing would really be perfectly in sync with the survival of the fittest, an evolutionary model, and just be considered a good and natural result of your evolutionary worldview. After all, these actions, rape, murder, stealing, would actually preserve the limited natural resources for the strongest to survive. Again, evolutionary model. But so for all of you either watching or listening to this, I want you to think about something. Was there even a purpose of listening to Daniel at any point today? I know that sounds harsh, and I don't mean it to be harsh. But according to his worldview, you really should have just turned off the volume and gotten a snack or hit the restroom like you would during a commercial while watching TV. Like I would have been the show, he'd have been the commercial. And I'm not saying that to be smug. I'm not saying that because I perceive a difference of intelligence or anything. I'm saying it for this reason. During Daniel's allotted time, you as a listener would have only heard, according to his worldview, indiscriminate sounds caused by random chemical reactions doing nothing but obeying the laws of chemistry and physics. It would be tantamount to watching and listening to pasta cook while starchy water boils over the top of the pot and stove. There is no meaning to it other than the reactions that occur as a result of the laws of chemistry and physics. It is very similar to the school Project Volcano that erupts as a result of adding the vinegar to the baking soda inside a volcano. No meaning, just chemicals doing what chemicals do. In the atheistic worldview, how does a person justify being able to be the end product of random chemical reactions obeying only natural law to undergoing a complete metamorphosis into a person being able to suddenly control his own thoughts, which you obviously do, Daniel, have an ability to reason, which you obviously can do, Daniel, and to control the words that exit your mouth? But the reality is you can't justify it. You can't justify random chemical reactions doing nothing but obeying laws of chemistry and physics, and somehow at some point in time, all of a sudden, the organism being able to control these chemical reactions into rational thought and speech. It doesn't work like that. So, of course, we all know, Daniel included, that he did speak with intelligible thought today. He prepared for this debate using his ability to reason, which he can't account for in his worldview. He controlled his thoughts today, which he can't account for in his worldview. He also purposefully selected his words and spoke those words today, which he also can't account for in his worldview. So how then could Daniel do this? Daniel, how could you do this? How were you able to have intelligent talk? You had very intelligent talk with me. It's not because you are random chemical reactions resulting from billions of years of evolution. It's because you're made in the image of God, who gave you the ability to do all these things and so much more. Romans 1 clearly states that everyone knows the true God that exists by his creation in the things that have been made. This includes even the people that exchange a truth about God for a lie, such as those that claim atheism, agnosticism, Buddhism, Catholicism, or any other false religion. Yes, atheism is a false religion. No one believer would look at a building and think that it could have started by having a pile of bricks and wires and windows, everything in fact, we could deconstruct that building and put it down into a pile. And you would never believe that it would have created itself or through random naturalistic processes. I could put billions of years of earthquakes, tornadoes, and lightning strikes on that pile, and you and I both know it would never erect itself into a building. How much more elaborate is a tree, a bird, a human being? You would agree with me, very elaborate. Even that single cell that you would agree with me is very complex, very elaborate. Even a single biological cell is more intricate than the building, with its myriad of specially designed and working pieces that work together for that cell to process nutrients for highly complex metabolic processes while having the ability to reproduce and function in general. Creation screams of a creator. Romans 2 verifies something very apparent in this world. You have an absolute standard, Daniel. You have an absolute standard. It was written on your heart. It's written on everyone's heart, according to Romans 2. The reason why you have a conscience and you have adamant beliefs about right and wrong is because God wrote it there. You don't want to admit that. You want to say that it's a preference or something else because you know it's a trap, and you admitted it, that there's no way to answer it. Well, look, you have convictions about this, and those convictions can't come about by random chemical reactions. And furthermore, those convictions are because God wrote them there. Romans 1 also tells us that many people, including you, suppress the truth about God. How so? In your sin, in your unrighteousness, the same way I did years ago. Sin causes the unbeliever to do the same thing that Adam and Eve did when they sinned at the beginning of time about 6,000 years ago, be held accountable to him without excuse on Judgment Day. Daniel, I agree to do this debate only because you're an atheist. You know as well as I do, you're created in the image of God and have broken God's laws at least thousands of times in your life. Every time you've lied, every time you've stolen something, if you committed adultery in your heart by lusting after a woman, committed murder in your heart by hating or even speaking ill of someone else, you've not only sinned against that person, as I said earlier, but you've broken God's law. So you've sinned not only against that person, but you've sinned against God Almighty, who made you, who made the rules, and who is, according to Hebrews 9:27, says, every man's appointed once to die in the judgment. You're going to face him on Judgment Day. And for our law breaking against the eternal God, you and I deserve nothing but the almighty wrath of God in hell for eternity, as our sins are against the eternal creator God. But in his grace and mercy, God took on flesh. Jesus Christ, eternally existent, eternally begotten of the Father, came to earth, took on flesh, lived the perfect life that none of us are capable of living. Never lied once or had a bad thought even come across his mind. Went to the cross to die. For his own sin, no, he had none. He went to die for the sins of people, to reconcile them back to God. And that, Daniel, in the 30 or 40 seconds that I have left, is God paid that penalty that we deserve. He took an eternity's worth of wrath on that cross, and out of his love took that wrath from Almighty God and paid that penalty in full. That if you repent and put your trust in him, which God only can grant, but that you will have everlasting life, that he will give you the ability to be in heaven forever because your penalty has been paid for. And Daniel, I pray that you cry out to God, that he opens up your eyes to sin and to your sin against him. And I pray that he grants you repentance and faith in him, and that your heart is a broken and contrite heart, that he gives you to cry out to him for that repentance and faith. That I say with more sincerity than anything I have said in the last 2.5 hours. And I will send you my books. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the closing statements. Closing statement, Dr. Anthony. All right, Daniel, you have 10 minutes closing.
That was a good statement, Dr. Anthony. And I really do appreciate it. Like, whenever I argue with theist Christians, I really do understand your point of view. You seem like a good guy, and you seem like you actually care if I go to heaven or hell, even though it's not a real place. But there's a couple things I'd like to say before we go. So you said a couple times that my brain is just a random jumble of chemicals, and that's why you can't trust reason. But it's not a random jumble of chemicals. So if we looked at a computer, so a computer is not made in the image of God. It's completely physical. And I think you would agree that computers don't have souls. They're physical. Their software is a code of ones and zeros. And it doesn't spit out nonsense. So if you feed in information, the computer responds accordingly. Our brains are basically these meat computers that control our physical bodies. They respond to stimuli, they respond to voices, they respond to information. It's not random. And these meat computers were selected for a very, very long time, since nervous systems first evolved, in order to be able to reality test. So we wanted to be able to see what's real, what's fake. Can we predict the future? Can we see where the tree is going to be next year? All that had great survival benefit. So we evolved these great abilities to reason. So disability reason has become so fine-tuned that if you use it as your axiomatic truth that reason is consistent, you'll get so far in life. You'll get to the moon. You can literally send a rocket ship to Mars. You can do whatever you desire. But today's argument is really about two different axioms. One is the axiom of reason. One is the axiom of biblical truth. And I believe the two to be totally mutually exclusive. Like you were saying earlier that I can't truly understand your opinion. And the reason why I can't truly understand your opinion is because I don't have the axiom of Christ as truth. And I would say the exact opposite. You can't understand the reasonings against your opinion because reason and Christ are two diametrically opposed things. I know that's rough to say, and I know you're a reasonable guy. I mean, you're a smart guy. I enjoyed talking to you, but there's certain areas that we talked about that I do feel like you had to evade, you had to obfuscate, like the fossils, stuff like that. But I think it's not like an obfuscation. I don't want to say it in that derogatory way. It's more like you stick with the axiom of biblical truth rather than going where the reason leads. But that's all beside the point. It's a great debate. I enjoyed doing it with you. I hope we can do it again. I promise I'll read your whole book, even though I'm sure you don't think a promise means much from an atheist. Yeah. And last thing I want to say is atheists really do have morals. I know plenty of atheists. They're a lot nicer people than most of the religious people that I know. Yeah. All right.
All right, fellas. Thank you so much for those closing statements.
Can I get your email address? Oh wait, I'm sorry. Let me.
Well, just do it on the Facebook, Messenger.
True. Okay, I forgot.
Absolutely.
About that.
Yeah.
Good stuff, fellas. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
As I always do with my guests, I like to send out gifts. So I will be contacting you both after this to get information to get those gifts out to you. Just my token of appreciation for the time invested in preparing for this.
I appreciate it.
And you guys have set a debate length record, 3 hours, man.
Wow, it's been that long already. Wow.
A good 2.5, 3 hours. I'm looking at the ticker.
That's impressive.
Oh yeah.
It flew by. I feel like we could have done another 2 or 3 hours in our
I enjoyed it so much. And if we're no longer like, I genuinely think that I think that you made some great points with the morals. Like whenever we were discussing morals, I think you made some great points. You really pinned me down to because I do believe that morals are relative, but it's hard to just say morals don't exist. Everybody do what you want. You can't do anything. Like that's just like a hard thing to admit, you know?
Right.
But I think it is a thing that atheists sort of have to swallow or push in the back of their mind. But you did a great job, man. I think we should do this again. And
I would gladly host it if you guys are down for it.
I don't want to do morals again, though. I know you're just screaming. I'll gladly do anything science related. I'm not the most moral guy.
I'd be happy to do some science too.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm sure you're very well versed in science. I mean, you have a degree in chemistry, math, and you're a dentist. So I'm sure it'd be a great debate. You know.
Yeah. Well, let's figure it out then.
All right, fellas. I'm gonna close this show out. I appreciate y'all once again. And look out for my message afterwards to get the contact information.
Sounds
all right.
Great.
Yeah, have a lovely weekend.
Have a great night. Yep.
All right, folks, that is it. That is the gospel truth. And, it's always, once again, now I say this repeatedly, like it's always great to be able to get guys on here who obviously has strong disagreements, but are able to converse and talk to these issues in a manner that's respectful. And for the Christian, that's glorifying to God. So, like I said, I appreciate Daniel. I appreciate Anthony for coming on and showing that graciousness towards each other. But with that said, I do want to rehash my upcoming shows. We have Mr. David Powman, and then he's going to be debating David Lewis, and they're going to be debating Is Calvinism True? This is coming up November 29th. 2019. And I have Zach Turbis versus Craig Joyner, Calvinist, another Calvinism debate. Does Calvinism teach the biblical understanding of the gospel? That's coming up November 30th. And I have Mr. Wesley Huff coming on for an interview, and he will be discussing with me the purpose and the importance of different Bible versions. So I'm sure this will be a very informative show. So hopefully you can join me there. That'll be about December 4th, 2019 at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I have Dr. Sean Cole versus Dr. Dale Tuggy, and they're debating, does the Bible teach that God is a Trinity? And that'll be coming up December 9th, 2019 at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So be on the lookout for all those shows. They are coming up. And, you know, if you want to see all the shows, that's just the next 4 shows. If you want to see all the shows that are coming up, you can go to my YouTube page and go to the Facebook page. You can see all the updates there. While you're there, go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And also, everything that all the content that's on there is also on podcast. So be sure to go ahead and subscribe to the podcast as well. I'm on every major podcast platform: iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, all of them. So go ahead and subscribe there. I would appreciate that and get that message out there. But with that said, I'm going to get out of here. And won't you guys be blessed? Enjoy your Thanksgiving. Just to give you a little hint, my wife is Filipino, so she's going to be making some lumpia. So that's one item. But we got a whole bunch of good food that's going to be happening Thanksgiving at the Wilson house. So once again, have a great Thanksgiving, and make sure you understand what you're thankful for. May God bless you, and may God keep you.